Rules Committee, come to order. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Rules Committee this afternoon as we meet to consider three important pieces of legislation. First, the committee will consider H.R. 4438, the American Research and Competitive Act of 2014. This critical bill permanently extends the research and development tax credit so that our nation's businesses and innovators can confidently invest in the United States of America. This provides the United States with a stronger engine. It supports the American economy. It helps the development of innovative techniques that continue to push the envelope. It educates our businessmen and women. It stimulates students to become a part of STEM, to where they will want to see where they have jobs at the other end, and it supports America in the international marketplace. Unfortunately, since the expiration of the tax credit January 1st this year, American companies have already seen a diminished capacity to effectively make investments necessary to remain competitive. With the reinstatement of the R&D tax credit, domestic innovators will be able to support new jobs, grow our economy, and to help America attract additional investment from abroad. The bottom line is business needs to work with certainty about what they do to support their business plans. In fact, a 2011 study performed by Ernst & Young indicated that this tax credit will raise wages by $8 billion and support 300,000 jobs in America. I look forward to supporting this legislation. I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, Chairman Kevin Brady, for his diligent work on this important issue. Secondly, the committee will consider two resolutions related to the IRS's improper targeting of conservative groups based solely on their political affiliations. The first of these resolutions will be to hold Lois Lerner in contempt of Congress for refusing to testify before the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, and it directs the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia to pursue charges against Ms. Lerner. The second resolution directs the Attorney General of the United States to appoint a special counsel to investigate the IRS scandal in an effort to shed light on the issue, ensure that every American's First Amendment rights are protected. Every citizen should have confidence that they can freely voice their opinions without the fear of retribution from the federal government. I believe these resolutions take appropriate and measured steps to achieve that goal, and I would like to thank Chairman Darrell Issa and Chairman Bob Goodlatte for bringing these resolutions before the committee today. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today with their testimony, and with that said, I'd like to invite both of our members here. I know you're trying to get out, Mr. Levin. You've got a 5:30 meeting, so if you'll hold on just a moment, please. I would like to defer to the gentleman from Massachusetts for any opening statement he'd like to make.
Thank you.
Gentleman's recognized.
I'll be brief, and I appreciate all the wonderful things that the chairman said about the R&D tax credit. I think I'm a big supporter of the R&D tax credit as long as it's paid for. What the chairman neglected to mention, that this bill, as written, adds about $150 billion. That's billion with a B to the deficit. One of the things that I thought that we could all agree on is that we ought to pay as you go, but apparently that's not the case with these tax credits. The other thing I would just say is that I'm also kind of startled that we're not doing anything about the earned income tax credit or the child tax credit, the American Opportunity Tax Credit that helps pay for college, or the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. All these tax credits help struggling working families, but apparently struggling working families are not on the agenda. And on the other two resolutions that the chairman mentioned, I regret that I think that what they constitute is essentially a witch hunt, and I'll have more to say about that later. But I don't want to hold anybody up, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman very much. I see the gentlewoman from New York is here. Does the gentleman wish to add anything to the gentleman from Massachusetts? Well, that's all right. And I am aware that the gentlewoman has been busy and had numerous meetings this afternoon, as we spoke earlier in the hall. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Well, I was just sorry about the whole thing. I think that's One thing obviously we're all very much concerned about is this is not paid for. And I'm not really sure personally when things are paid for and when they aren't. I don't know if Republicans want something, we can just rack up the debt. But if Democrats are a bipartisan bill, which we had before Ways and Means this week, unpaid for, try to help foster children age out with some help with Social Security cards and driver's license and things to try to keep them out of the sex trade. And unpaid for, they're not going to do that. So anyway, last July, I co-signed a request for FEMA for the fertilizer plant explosion in Texas. No demand for pay for. 6 months earlier, we had a vote on aid package for the victims of Superstorm Sandy in my district. Majority of the Republicans, including you, Mr. Brady, voted no, demanding a pay for. So we've got to make some decision here, I think, on what we really believe. We're going to pay for it or we're not. But it does look if, I think since 2011, cut-go rules have been waived 14 times for Republican legislation, once for a Democratic amendment. The amendment that I spoke of for children in foster care was really from Congressman Paulson and me. He and I have been working together to try to help the case of foster children getting caught in the sex trade for some time. And it was a great disappointment to us to have that turned down. So I think we know why we're here and what we're going to do, and we know that should it pass and come over to the President's desk, he's going to veto it. So
I thank the gentlewoman for an opening comments. I thank the gentleman from Massachusetts for his comments. I want to welcome Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, thank you very much for coming back to the Rules Committee as the ranking member of the Committee on Ways and Means, and the gentleman from Texas, the head of the Joint Tax Committee. I want to thank both of you for H.R. 4438, American Research and Committee Act 2014, as witness for that. And I'm going to, if I can, I normally defer to the gentleman from Texas as a result of being the majority to speak about his bill. Mr. Levin, would you like to go first or second today, knowing that you are trying to really get out here as quickly as possible, and you had advised me of that several hours ago? Gentleman from Michigan is recognized, by the way. As you know, anything you have in writing will be entered the record. Thank you very much. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much. And once again, it's a pleasure to be here.
turn your microphone on.
Let me just summarize, if I might, quickly the statement of administration policy that was issued, because it very much reflects the arguments that were put forth by Democrats in the markup. And I'm sorry I won't be here, Mr. Brady, for your presentation, but we argued this at some length at the markup. And we look forward to the argument tomorrow. As made clear in the Statement of Administration policy, there's a lot of support for, once again, continuing the R&D tax credit. As the SAP says, the administration favors enhancing, simplifying, and making it permanent, but doing so by offsetting the cost. And the SAP talks about using tax loopholes to pay for it. As mentioned earlier, if we were to pass this, it would add to the deficit $156 billion in 10 years. And that's just the first crack at this, because in the Ways and Means Committee, we also voted on 5 more. And the accumulated cost of those is $310 billion, unpaid for in the legislation that came out of the Ways and Means Committee. And you have to add to that other extenders. Those are just 6. And so if you put together, as the SAP says, other provisions likely to be extended, it would come to adding $500 billion or more to the deficit. And this would essentially wipe out most of the deficit reduction in the 2013 Act. Last month, you on the Republican side, I think all of you here, passed a budget resolution that required offsetting any tax extenders that were made permanent with other revenue measures. That isn't done here at all. This bill essentially would cost more than 15 times the cost of extending unemployment insurance that passed the Senate and it's paid for in the Senate bill. Okay, the mic, I'll get closer. And also is pointed out in the Standard Administration Procedures, it would double the discretionary funding increases for the defense and non-defense priorities. Also, what is not addressed are extenders like the Work Opportunity Tax Credit, the New Markets Tax Credits, all of the renewable energy tax credits, the tax relief for homeowners that face major bills because of mortgage foreclosures, and also additional important provisions. So here we are, and I think we have to also understand that what this bill doesn't consider, Mr. McGovern has already pointed to it, are other provisions and important ones that relate to things like the Earned Income Tax Credit, the American Opportunity Tax Credit, and the Child Tax Credit that expire in 2017. So essentially what you have here is a wild journey on more deficits and more debt. It is going to dramatically increase this problem that we have here. And it's ironical, it wasn't long ago that Chairman Camp said, and I quote, "The path to our economic recovery starts with fiscal responsibility in Washington." So as a result of this, the administration a few hours ago put out their statement of administration policy, and it said this: "The administration wants to work with Congress to make progress on measures that strengthen the economy and help middle-class families, including pro-growth business tax reform. However, making traditional tax extenders permanent without offsets represents the wrong approach. If the President were presented with H.R. 4438, his senior advisors would recommend that he veto the bill." So essentially, for the reasons outlined here, and that we laid out at length in the markup, this is a bill that will go nowhere. But what it is a bill that essentially raises the ghosts of further budget deficits that I thought was part of the approach of the members of this committee. So I think it is totally inconsistent to proceed, and we look forward to having the debate on the floor. Thank you very much.
Mr. Levin, thank you very much. And I note that you're preparing to leave any minute now, but to the extent of time that you have, I appreciate it. And then when you need to go, if you'll just give me the signal, I'll make sure that we know that you're excused at that time.
I might, after Mr. Brady finishes his remarks, I'd like to leave.
I appreciate that very much.
And I appreciate your courtesy, and I trust you'll leave enough time on the floor for us to have a thorough debate of this, because we're talking about adding more than $310 billion to the deficit. When you add it all up, it will be at least $500 billion, and I think that deserves ample debate. Thank you very much.
The gentleman is appreciated for being here. As you know, I'm trying to get through this quickly, but I always want to make sure that you know this committee is open to you. You represent the Democrat Party. You're the ranking member, and your ideas before this committee are very important, and I appreciate you taking time to.
I always look forward to joining you.
Thank you very much. Chairman Brady, as always, please do feel free to make sure that light is on for you, that
Yes,
the
sir.
microphone's pulled up. Then the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the members of the Rules Committee, and I will submit my opening statement for the record and just speak informally for a moment or
Objection.
so. America needs jobs, lots of them. Too many Americans can't find full-time work, and too many more simply given up looking for work. This is one of the weakest economic recoveries in half a century, where Republicans and Democrats have always agreed on job creation has been in the need for the research and development tax credit. We know it's critical to our innovators in America. We know it's critical to our biosciences and the medical breakthroughs we're counting on. We know it's critical to manufacturing. Mr. Levin in his home state of Michigan has made this point over and over again. It's critical for energy development as well. When America first put in place in 1981 our research and development tax incentives, we led the world in incentives. Today, we've fallen to 27th. As a result, other countries like China are dramatically increasing their amount of R&D. In fact, their share worldwide has increased fourfold. And by some experts, many experts believe China will surpass America's R&D spending within 8 years. They're not alone. Today, Russia, Korea, Slovenia, for heaven's sakes, devotes more of their GDP to R&D than America does. As a result, we're falling behind. In jobs, in research and development, the patents and innovations go with them are occurring overseas rather than here in America. This is a bipartisan bill brought to you by Congressman John Larson and myself. It is the bill that Chairman Camp and Ranking Member Levin have carried together for many, many years. It does three things. One, it simplifies the research and development tax credit so more businesses, small, medium, and large, can take advantage of it. It increases the alternative simplified credit from 14 to 20%, again, making it easier to encourage more research and development year over year over year, moving us in the right direction. But perhaps most importantly, it makes the research and development tax credit permanent. And that, our innovators tell us, is critical. Most research and development projects take 5 to 10 years to fruition. Unfortunately, Congress, although this has been in the tax code for now nearly 34 years, has only extended it temporarily. So we've lost the bang for the buck that ought to be coming from the R&D tax credit. And innovators tell us, as much, Mr. Chairman, as you noted in your remarks, how much more research is created by a permanent tax credit, the higher wages that come from it. All of that is really critical if it's made permanent. That's what this bill does. It's critical to job creation. It's critical to increasing wages. And it has been bipartisan. Republicans and Democrats have supported this for years. And today we hear the objection is that these research jobs and wages don't matter because now this is not paid for. But Mr. Levin voted 7 times to extend the research and development tax credit without paying for it. Mr. Hoyer, Ms. Slaughter, 6 times. Mr. McGovern, 5 times. I can go down, frankly, the Rules Committee roster. So what's different now? What's different now? The only thing different that I can see is politics. That some are willing to sacrifice the jobs for our research companies and workers, our manufacturing companies and workers, our energy companies and workers, because it is politically expedient. That's what's wrong around here. The reason this is brought to you as one of a package of tax extenders is it's so critical to job creation and U.S. competitiveness. And by the way, I'll finish with this, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Levin and others know, Chairman Camp has announced that the tax extenders are being reviewed one by one and sometimes in packages. As is right, we are holding hearings to gauge the pro-growth importance of each one and then holding markups to do that. So the litany of tax extenders that have been identified today frankly, are part of the overall review and will be addressed in the future. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Brady, thank you very much. Ms. Levin, thank you very much for being here, and I appreciate your testimony. Mr. Brady, I 25 years ago worked at an organization that previously was known as Bell Labs, became Bell Communications Research in New Jersey, and it was a national world leader in telecommunications research and development. Large organization that fed America and the world not only technology, but technology that worked and could be applied to better people's lives. The company was essential to having people not only have higher education, to take the risk and benefit of studying hard and making their life better, but really helped everyday people. This happened because of the environment for research and development, that a tax credit that could be considered as a regular business deduction. I think what you alluded to was right. I think it is politics. We shouldn't have R&D tax credit held hostage every single year or every other year to find out that our friends on the other side really want to raise taxes in return for doing the right thing for business to hire and to utilize this R&D tax component. It's not just telecommunications. It's across the board, and America is giving up our leadership because of politics. And I agree with you. I couldn't be more pleased to have you here today, and I'm delighted with your presentation. I intend to support your bill.
Thank you, Chairman.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Brady for being here today, too, and I appreciate very much the history reminder that he gave us about our colleagues having voted for these extenders, especially the R&D, without it being paid for. I think it is always a good reminder to be told about these things and how people's attitudes change sometimes depending on who is introducing the bill and who's for the bill as opposed to who's against the bill. So I very much appreciated that, and I appreciate what you're doing. We've all talked to people from our districts who have said the R&D tax credit needs to be made permanent. What I hear from business and industry all the time is that they're dealing with uncertainty out there. Uncertainty as far as taxes are concerned, uncertainty as far as policy is concerned here in Washington, and that's creating one of the biggest problems for them in terms of creating jobs. I think, as the Speaker does, almost every time he gets up, he says, where are the jobs? The economy is still very sluggish. 0.1%, for heaven's sakes, growth in the last quarter, not good. So I agree with Chairman Brady. We need to be doing all that we possibly can. We've done a lot in the House, a lot of bills sitting in the Senate that haven't been acted upon. So we're doing our part, and we'll continue to do those. So I thank Mr. Brady, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back time. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
I think I pretty well stated my feelings about the bill when I first got here, but I do point again that the issue here is not making these tax cuts permanent or not. The issue is what we pay for. And the fact that you're so, the exclusivity of that, you guys can do anything you want because you are the majority. But when we try to do something that's not paid for, even if it's an emergency, as Sandy, the storm certainly was, that has to be all paid for. And we just want to point out again the inconsistency in the House of Representatives and who puts out what amendment. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back time. Gentleman from Utah is recognized. Gentleman waives his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
No, I just want to associate myself with the remarks of the ranking member. I mean, to the gentlelady from North Carolina who talks about consistency, I mean, I've lost count how many times Republicans voted to extend unemployment benefits to those who are unemployed, and they were never paid for. But all of a sudden now they have to be paid for. We can't extend unemployment benefits without an offset. And so I think that's an important lesson to remember here. Again, my criticism is that we all should come to the realization that unpaid for tax cuts add to the deficit. I mean, we saw that when with the Bush tax cuts, and we ought to find ways to offset them. And look, we're working with you to try to find offsets to unemployment benefits. Unfortunately, we can't get that scheduled on the House floor. But I think we ought to be figuring out ways to pay for this. And because I support the R&D tax credit, but I also support the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Tax Credit, the American Opportunity Tax Credit, and the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. And at some point, we're going to have to pay attention to the fact that there are working families in this country who are struggling and who need our attention, and who this House consistently and continuously ignores. So, again, if we could find a pay-for here, I think you'd have unanimity. But apparently you don't want to do it, and the White House will not sign this into law, so we'll go through this exercise, and maybe the Senate will take care of it, and we can deal with it then. But with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. By the way, I don't know what the Senate's going to do, but I watched some of the shows over the weekend, and it appears as though there are a good number of senators who are prepared to move a bill on the Keystone Pipeline, which would provide a great deal of revenue to this country and jobs, and that might be a good thing for us to take this legislation, move it to the Senate, and us to work together on jobs and job creation, protect American workers and innovation. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Oklahoma, the young chairman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank my friend for being here, and I certainly be very supportive of your legislation. I think this is actually one of these, tax credits, tax deductions, whatever you want to say, that has proved its worth over time, that both parties have routinely extended when they were in the majority. My friends did it in 2008 and 2010 with no pay for. So we've all decided in a bipartisan sense it's a pretty good idea to encourage innovation and research. And again, to me, the pay for argument, I think, is an important argument, but one that, again, for whatever reason, neither side has found compelling enough not to extend this in the past. So I think that is mostly a political argument. Where I think my friends do make a point on the other side, and I have a question to my friend from Texas about this, that, why I think this one should be made permanent. I've always believed that. I think, tell us a little bit what you envision going forward, because the Senate will almost certainly move an extenders package. I actually see this more as a vehicle to get into a conference where we have a larger discussion between the two bodies and between the two parties, and you guys will probably come up with something that's bipartisan out of that, and we'll vote for it. But like my friend, Mr. McGovern, I've got some of these other tax credits that I think are important that other people may not. So how do we batch those? How do we move forward to consider them? Because I also assume you're doing a little bit of weeding the garden here, which needs to be done. Not every tax credit that we have is equally important. This one is. I think it has really been demonstrated that. But others may not be and may have been carried along, if you will, by some of these larger ones. So I think the process is a thoughtful one. But I don't think so far you've given us a clear vision as to where the committee sees itself going as it looks at these issue by issue.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. The Ways and Means Committee Republicans have laid out a pro-growth tax reform discussion draft that dramatically increases the economy by about $3 trillion, creates 2 million new jobs, shrinks the tax code by about a quarter, and adds about $1,300 a year in wages to every family in America. That is unlike the Affordable Care Act that was assembled in secrecy. This is being laid out to the entire nation so that they can give their feedback to you and I and other lawmakers on both sides of the aisle on how we fix this broken tax code and rein in the IRS. As we are listening to the American public, Chairman Camp is bringing forward some of the extenders, going through a very thoughtful, deliberative process, the way that the importance, the priorities, the pro-growth potential of these provisions, many of which, like R&D, has been a permanent part of our tax code, but merely extended temporarily. The worst of all worlds, because we're not getting the bang for the buck for it. Chairman Camp and the Ways and Means Committee has passed out 7 of those proposals, extenders initially. We will throughout the balance of this year. We hope to conclude by the summer the balance of those provisions. And as you said, it's more likely that as the House votes on these, as there is support for these, the final product will be determined after the November election, both parties sitting down working together. I might add, Senate Democrats have proposed extending all of the extenders without paying for them either.
Well, again, neither side has ever felt it necessary to pay for these extender packages I'm aware of when they were in the majority. I mean, we just generally don't do that with tax cuts. We try to look more broadly, and we generally, whether we say it explicitly or not, assume that this generates economic activity. And in this case, I don't think there's any question. This generates economic activity that provides thousands of jobs and does the economy a great deal of good. So I think this one would pass regardless of who was in the majority and would be extended and probably would not be paid for. That's been the history of it. I do urge you, and later on I'll offer an amendment and withdraw it, but there are a range of these tax cuts that are important. I think this one is central to our economy. Others are more targeted, more nuanced. The one I'm going to mention, which is in the extenders package, is called 138J, or it's at the Indian lands and former Indian land tax credit. Now, R&D research is going to benefit the entire economy, but I'll guarantee you this, not much of it is conducted on Indian reservations. Some of it is conducted in former Indian reservations, so it's certainly beneficial. But, you know, that's a particular tax code, like my friend from Massachusetts, that is concerned about, that targets some of the least fortunate parts of our country to try and encourage economic development in those areas. So I just want to make sure that those kinds of things aren't forgotten about, and we don't at least have the chance to make the case there.
Yes, sir.
So I would urge your committee through you as you go forward. And again, I'm very happy to support this this particular tax measure. I think it's good policy. I think it's good for the country. But I think we have to get a little clearer plan because you know, I'd like to know which ones are targeted for elimination, or as you work your way through that, which ones you think are less valuable. I may agree or disagree with some of those, but I think we're going to need to know that. And again, I do expect, I look at this as when people say it's dead, it's not dead. Frankly, it's going to get us to a place where we have a discussion between the two bodies and between the two parties, where I expect you will arrive at some common package and come back to us with something, because I don't think either side is going to let something like this particular tax break expire. I just don't believe they will. So I applaud you for beginning the process of looking at these tax breaks, or if you want to call them that, or tax credits. I consider them stimulus, actually, that one at a time to try and determine which ones really are valuable, which ones continue to work. This one, I think both sides would agree pretty. If they were being candid here, this is one we would save no matter what, and we've both voted for repeatedly, and that our friends in the private sector rely on, but we've never quite given them the certainty, as you suggest that we should. But please, as we go forward, include the Congress beyond your committee in that discussion, because we're all going to have concerns of ones that we think are important, and we're all going to want to have our day to make that case, whether we win it or not. But again, I commend my friend for focusing on something. And hey, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. This is a step in the right direction toward tax reform, and certainly a step toward keeping something in the code and making it permanent that all of us know should be made permanent. And all of us has repeatedly supported, whether it was, quote, paid for or not paid for, multiple times in our career. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman, Judge Hastings, do you seek to be recognized?
Thank you very much,
Gentleman's
Mr.
recognized.
Mr. Chairman, following on my friend from Oklahoma's comments, I do agree that we have passed this measure on numerous occasions. The context, however, in today's efforts needs to at least be put on the table, and that is that it's being done without an offset after we were told that because we could not find an offset that satisfied the Republican majority, that we were not able to have unemployment insurance for long-term unemployed people, which expired in December. And if we want to be consistent, if we couldn't find an offset for that, then I don't see how you come forward today and say that this is any more important than that particular measure. And I guess the question that I ask you, Mr. Brady, is are you satisfied now that we don't have to worry anymore about paying for future bills? Are Republicans satisfied that the national debt has been adequately dealt with?
I'm satisfied that our Americans who can't find a job need Congress to act to help them create good-paying jobs. Research and development tax credit is one of those key proposals. And as Republicans and Democrats have noted, this over 34 years is in effect a permanent part of our code, extended temporarily. It's time to take the asterisk off this provision and allow our innovators from manufacturers, and Florida has a remarkable economy, allow them to create the good-paying jobs our families need.
If the Republicans believe that it's okay for politics that you support to add to the deficit, is all this dire talk about the deficit, or is it about not liking certain policies?
Our top concern is getting people back to work.
So
in provisions like this, get them into good-paying jobs, and by the way, create tax revenue to help us begin to balance the budget.
You considered 6 extenders this week. Why have you chosen to begin with this one? And are there plans to deal with other of the extenders, and if so, which one?
Fair question. A package of 7 was passed out of the Ways and Means Committee and sent forward. All of them create jobs, from small businesses being able to write off immediately the equipment and software and technology that they're buying so they can create more jobs, to the research and development tax credit. This package focused on job creation. Chairman Camp has announced we will hold a series of hearings, so to Mr. Cole's point, we can have an open, transparent discussion about the benefits and the impacts of all of these tax extenders. We have not, as a Congress, afforded all these extensions in the past. In fact, we've weeded through them in the past. This is an opportunity throughout the balance of this year, Mr. Hastings, to have the conversations you want to have about the importance of these extenders to whether they're geographic areas, the state and local sales tax deductions, by the way, which we have in common, and others. We're going to be able to have that discussion.
Right. Do you agree that with the CBO estimates that allow that this would reduce revenues by $156 billion over the next 10 years?
I do, just as the extensions we've made, some 14 of them were not paid for as well, added to the deficit, but were just absolutely critical to innovation, job creation in America.
Well, I certainly understand that, but I think it's absolutely critical, too, to provide unemployment benefits for long-term unemployed individuals who at one time had a job and now are in need of a little bit of assistance. And I might add, I think it's a mistake to ignore the fact that if we did provide the unemployment benefits to people, that too would create jobs. And in the long haul, I'm not opposed, and I do understand the dynamics. I will be opposed to the process here, and I'd ask you that as a final question. Did you ask for a recommendation as to how this rule should be proceeded upon? My belief is it will likely be a closed rule, and is that satisfactory with you? Would you not like to hear other members' views on this matter?
Yeah, I defer to the judgment of the Rules Committee in those matters. What I do know is that those who can't find a job today most desperately seek a good-paying job. And here's an area of innovation in manufacturing, energy, and healthcare that we can help create 300,000 new jobs, which frankly would be a step in the right direction.
My understanding is that there was a request for it to be a closed rule, and a letter to that effect from your committee to this committee.
Chairman Yield?
Yes.
This is considered a tax provision, and so that might be consistent with Republicans and Democrats as they deal with that issue. It would not surprise me, while I do not recall the letter, I do know that this Rules Committee will make the decision. I appreciate the gentleman's feedback. I yield back.
Right. I stand by my position, Mr. Chairman, that we are operating outside the realm of the statements that have been made by the majority to the effect that we would have an open and transparent legislative process. And I believe that there are numerous members who are not on the Ways and Means Committee or the Rules Committee that would have an interest in providing some amendment to this. And so on tomorrow, if I'm managing the rule for our side, I'll point it out more significantly. But for the moment, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. I appreciate the gentleman's comments. The gentleman from Florida is recognized. Gentleman does not have questions. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, frankly, this whole discussion needs to be about how we can afford tax cuts. Everybody would like to cut taxes for everybody. Of course, we want to continue this tax cut. We want to cut the question is, what can we afford in a time of deficits? I hope that, I heard Mr. Hastings say that he was worried about this being a closed rule. I certainly hope it allows an amendment we're going to hear about shortly from Mr. Cardenas that I was proud to join him as a co-sponsor of, along with Mr. Garcia, where we propose a bipartisan pay-for this renewing this tax cut, namely taking a bipartisan bill that's passed the Senate with more than 2/3 and has strong bipartisan sponsorship in the House, H.R. 15, and apply that as a pay-for this bill. And I was actually disappointed to see that others didn't come forward with pay-fors. I was hoping, frankly, that there'd be, 5 or 10 pay-fors that different members would offer up, and we would have the opportunity to discuss them. But I do hope that we will make in order the Cardenas Amendment, which we'll hear about shortly. It is the only bipartisan option that has been provided to pay for the bill. It's something with strong Senate support as well, more than 2/3 of the Senate. And I think would help make this a lot controversial, because when you avoid the real discussion about how you're going to pay for things, you're just kicking the can down the road. And frankly, I think that's what we've heard from the American people, that they're tired of and they want solutions. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Orlando, Florida is recognized. Gentleman does not have questions. The gentleman from Texas is recognized. The gentleman does not have any questions. Mr. Brady, thank you very much for not only representing the ideas and views that you've got. I will tell you that I, like you, am concerned about and the gentlewoman, Ms. Fox, a GDP that stalled again, economic advances, and last week news that the middle class of this country, their wages are growing at a slower rate than 8 or 9 other countries, and it's disturbing, but not surprising. And it's not surprising because we have those that want to raise taxes and who do not understand business, do not understand that this should be included in the way business is done, that research and development shouldn't be singled out. But it is. And that's what we've got to deal with, and I was proud of the way you handled this, and I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for reminding us that under both Republicans and Democrats, tax provisions do come to the floor.
They do come to the floor of the way. Thank you very much. Gentleman's now excused. Mr. Cardenas, if you would please feel free to come to the table. I would like to welcome you to the Rules Committee. As always, anything you have in writing will be entered into the record when you extend it to us. Mr. Cardenas, we're delighted that you are here representing yourself, your great state, and your party, and the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank you for running your committee. The times that I've been here, it's been very respectful and orderly, and what I'm used to, as a matter of fact, but not what we tend to hear what's going on television about what's going on up here. So I just want to thank you for for the decorum and the respect that I've witnessed with your chairmanship. Thank you. Good evening, Chairman and members of the Rules Committee. I want to thank you for allowing me to offer an amendment for your consideration. And also, as my colleague, Congressman Polis, pointed out, I'd like to thank him and Congressman Garcia for co-sponsoring this amendment. I'm here to propose an amendment that will pay for H.R. 4438, the bill that's before you. My amendment does not raise taxes. It raises revenue. There is no better way to improve research and development in this country than to pass comprehensive immigration reform, which will unleash the talent from our universities into our economy. My amendment recognizes the importance of stimulating research and development and would assist the effort by inserting H.R. 15, a vehicle that would help attract and keep the world's brightest minds in the United States. Studies show that by 2018, Americans will face a projected shortfall of over 200,000 holders of advanced degrees in science, technology, engineering, and math. Yet more than half of all PhDs graduating with degrees in these fields from U.S. universities are foreign-born. Just last month, we saw the annual H-1B visa cap reached in less than 1 week, and America's outdated immigration laws put our innovation in America on hold. We need comprehensive immigration reform so we can ensure our nation remains a magnet for the best and brightest who come here to grow our economy and create American jobs. Without passing comprehensive immigration reform legislation, the future generations of researchers, scientists, and engineers currently in our schools who came to this country through no fault of their own without papers cannot participate in our economy without comprehensive immigration reform because of their immigration status. If we are serious about growing our economy and promoting research and development, then we need to make sure that our businesses have the researchers to do the job. The only way to do that today is to pass comprehensive immigration reform along with H.R. 4438. I also note that the current bill, H.R. 4438, is unpaid for and will cost $155.5 billion. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, comprehensive immigration reform, H.R. 15, will reduce our deficit by as much as $900 billion. This amendment is the best pay for to expand research and development, and it happens to create jobs, raise revenue, and allows our economy to realize its fullest potential. I also am very, very proud of our country being the #1 research development innovation place on the planet. I was very proud to work for an American company when I got my electrical engineering degree, and later on owned my own business, and through my business made sure that many families were able to feed their families. And that's the end result of good research and development, and that's the end result of good tax policy as well. And with all due respect, we all talk about the budget deficit, and I believe that this amendment will actually complement fully H.R. 4438 and fully fund the deficit that it would create without this amendment. So I thank you once again for allowing me to speak today, and I hope your vote for this amendment actually means that you are voting yes for business and yes for our economic certainty in this country. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cardenas, I note that you're a member of the Budget Committee, Natural Resources Committee, and OGR.
Correct.
You're up talking about a tax bill today, and you've really qualified yourself, in my opinion, because you owned your own business, or at least you worked in a business.
No, I owned it.
You owned your own business. I'd like to give you credit for that, and thank you very much.
Thank you. It wasn't easy, but I enjoyed it.
It is not easy at all. And that's the question I'd just like to focus on. Do you believe if you did not have to pay taxes do you believe taxes compete against your ability to hire more employees?
It's a factor, correct. No question about it. It's a factor. But the #1 factor, if you allow me, Mr. Chairman, that I had owning a business was access to capital. When the business was moving and it was time to take it to the next level, it was access to capital. And also, if you found something that you could latch on to grow your business, those were the two main components. Taxes were a factor, yes, sir.
Taxes are a factor. Thank you very much. Mrs. Fox?
Thank you very much, Mr. Cardenas. I have no questions, but I appreciate it, and I appreciate hearing, too, about the fact that you started and ran your own business. I think we need lots more people in Congress with that kind of experience. Thank you.
I agree.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Well, I want to thank Mr. Cardenas for being here, and I support his amendment, and this is the committee that can make it an order. We're the Rules Committee. We make the rules. And to my friends on the other side of the aisle who don't like immigrants, then they could vote no.
Excuse me. The gentleman will yield just a moment,
I'm happy to
please.
yield to the gentleman.
I believe that that statement is blatantly unfair, and you know and I know that I've tried during the period of time that I am the chairman of this committee, whether someone's sitting on that side or whether they're sitting on this side, not to make inflammatory remarks which not only are not true, but are meant to be political in nature against someone. And that is not a fair statement for you to make, Mr.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I didn't mention anybody's name. I made a general.
You sit on the other side of the aisle, and I categorically reject that. And I would ask the gentleman to please know that that would not be, should not be a statement that would be made in this committee.
Well, let me rephrase this.
Thank you very much.
For the life of me, I cannot understand why in the House of Representatives, which in this Congress, which is the greatest democracy, the greatest democracy on the planet, why we can't get a vote on comprehensive immigration reform. The United States Senate, in a bipartisan way, passed comprehensive immigration reform, again, in a bipartisan way, and we are not even given the right or the opportunity to be able to bring it to the floor and have a debate and have a vote on it up or down. Now, what you have brought before this committee, I think, is a very reasonable proposal, because one of the complaints that we have about these tax extender bills, as I said before, is that they're unpaid for. For all the talk about reducing the deficit and all the talk about pay-fors, the only time many of my friends on the other side of the aisle want to pay for anything is when it comes to helping somebody who's poor or some struggling working-class family that's trying to make ends meet. But when it comes to tax extenders, we don't have to pay for them. We don't have to pay for them. And yes, there has been a history where both sides have voted for unpaid for tax bills in the past. And I think I'd like to think that, given the fact that we're emerging from one of the worst economies since the Great Depression and trying to dig ourselves out of a deficit that in large part was created by these tax cuts during the Bush administration, that we've learned our lesson, that we're going to pay as we go. But what you're talking about would not only pay for this tax extender bill, but much, much more. It's this, what is the number over the next 20 years that we would expect to bring into our Treasury?
According to H.R. 15, which is the language of my amendment, it would be $900 billion.
$900 billion. $900 billion to simply recognize the fact that we have an immigrant community in here that is contributing greatly to the well-being of this country, and that when they pay taxes, will contribute even more. And I do think it is an outrage, Mr. Chairman, quite frankly, that here we are, and we still can't get a vote on this. The Senate has voted. The American people overwhelmingly want it, and this leadership is blocking us from a vote. So I support your bill because it's paid for. I support your amendment because I think it's the right thing to do. And I regret very much that that this committee will once again most likely not give you that opportunity. But I will tell you, I think the American people should be angry with the way this Congress, this House of Representatives handled this issue. People deserve a vote. You don't want to vote for it, vote no. But give us a vote. I yield back my...
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Utah is recognized. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm fully supportive of Mr. Cardenas' amendment. It makes an awful lot of sense, and I echo the sentiments of my colleague from Michigan regarding the fact that somehow or another, whether it's like or dislike, the simple fact of the matter is that something that we believe that needs to be done in our great country is not being done. Now, whatever the reason for it may very well lie in the realm of politics overall, but I do believe that we should have a real immigration reform, and I think this measure, in attendance with the measure on the floor, is one that would help to achieve better economic circumstances, not only for immigrants, but for all Americans. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chairman Coles recognized.
Thank you. I too appreciate the gentleman coming. As a fellow business owner, and we got several of them here, I appreciate that more than I can say. I just want to make a couple of quick points to reference some of the comments that have been made. Look, with all due respect, we have 230 pieces of legislation sitting in the United States Senate that this body has passed that nobody's voting on over there. And I sat here in the minority and proposed legislation that, by the way, when we got in the majority, passed bipartisan on not funding political conventions. I never got a vote on that in the Senate until it got hooked up with something else. It just takes time to do legislation on occasion. Whether this is the appropriate vehicle or not, I think that's worth considering, and that's what this committee is going to do, and I appreciate my friend for bringing it forward. I think it's a very appropriate thing for him to do. But, again, let's not act as if, number one, when my friends were in the majority, they always gave us votes on things that were popular in a bipartisan sense, and second, I will yield in a second. Okay. And second, let's not assume that the United States Senate gives us things that are popular. Matter of fact, I can't recall a time when the Senate has been willing to bring to the floor legislation that a majority of Democrats opposed, but a majority of the body was in favor of. We did that in this side of the aisle with fiscal cliff. We did that with VAWA. We did that on Sandy relief. We did that on reopening the government after the shutdown. So when will the United States Senate, and I don't presume my friend speaks for them, but that'd be an unfair burden, but I haven't seen that on the other side. And frankly, I didn't see a lot of that when our friends were in the majority. So this idea we deserve a vote on this when we've got 230 things that have passed this body that aren't being voted on the other side strikes me as I want it my way when I like it, but when I do it to the other guy, that's okay. Because that was done to us when our friends were in the majority. That's done to us by the United States Senate on a routine basis now. With that, I'll certainly yield to my friend.
No, and I thank the gentleman for yielding, and and with all due respect to his political conventions bill, I don't know how many of the bills he was referring to would bring in close to $900 billion worth of revenue over the next 20 years. I think this is a little bit different. This is, I think, something that would help our economy greatly, and so I think it rises to a different level. With all due respect,
well, I think my friend makes a fair point, because I use that as an illustrative point, but not a point suggesting they're comparable. But I will tell you this again: 230 pieces of legislation. That's quite a few. A lot of those are extraordinarily important as well. And never got picked up. And again, just to point out again for the record, we have done that on occasion here. I did vote with my friends on the other side of the aisle on violence against women, on fiscal cliff, on some of these other issues that were not particularly popular on our side of the aisle. We haven't seen that in the United States Senate. We did not see that, with all due respect, when my friends were in the majority. So to come here and preach it now on every piece of legislation, I think that strains credibility as well. If you're going to demand that, you got to be willing to do that. We haven't seen that from the United States Senate. That's not my friend's responsibility. But the idea that this body is going to routinely, consider legislation when the other side won't extend that same courtesy, I think is a rather fanciful notion. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
In hearing Mr. Cole's remarks, there's legislation that we've passed sitting over there, and knowing there's legislation they've passed sitting over here, like H.R. 15, it seems like there might be the basis of a deal. Look, I know one of the bills, as an example, that passed out of this body was shortcutting the process on the pipeline to go immediately to approval, and it's not something I voted for. I voted against it. I think the President should take his time to study it and figure out the solution, whether that takes months or years, and whether to approve it. But you know what? If that's waiting over there and H.R. 15's waiting over here, maybe we can strike a deal here where we say, look, get the Senate to act on one of the pipeline bills, and we'll act on immigration reform, and people will vote their conscience and take them to the floor. That's the only way to get it unjammed. If there's all this stuff that's piling up on both sides, I think you need a deal between the two chambers. And one of the biggest, most substantial parts of that deal is H.R. 15. Happy to yield to my colleague.
First, I want to agree with my friend. I think that's exactly the right approach that needs to be taken. And I think I've demonstrated I've done that plenty of times. When there's been a deal on the table on some of these rather controversial issues, I've quite often been willing to vote for them. I think we've got huge fiscal problems in front of us right now. And I think, sequester is going to return in a couple of years. The debt ceiling is after the election. I think there's a number of triggering events here. So I will tell my friend this. I don't know in what form or when it comes, but if we can ever get the majority leader and the president and the speaker all in the same room to do this, and they can come to a common agreement, then I'm much more inclined to vote for it than not. But I don't think that begins by demanding from one side that you give in on something we want, but so far we haven't been willing to consider things that you think are important. And I don't suggest my friend is part of that, because he's not. But I do suggest that's where the United States Senate has been continuously for a good time. So, again, I think that's part of the problem we face. And thank you for yielding. With that, I certainly yield back my time to you.
Sure. Two questions for Mr. Cardenas. One, I was going to ask is it true that in addition to fully paying for this tax extender, your proposal actually reduces the deficit on top of that?
Yes, it would. The numbers do exceed the cost of the bill in chief. Yes.
And the second question is maybe you could talk a little bit about the bipartisan support for the pay for that we proposed along with you.
Yes, we have a lot of support out in throughout America. We have a lot of police chiefs and sheriffs, elected police chiefs and sheriffs and appointed police chiefs and sheriffs throughout the country who are definitely for comprehensive immigration reform, including H.R. 15. In addition to that, we have much clergy. As a matter of fact, my mentor and personal friend who runs a Protestant church that I attend, he's actually part of a coalition of, they call themselves Bibles, Badges, and Business, the 3 Bs. They're involved and are very much in favor of H.R. 15 and comprehensive immigration reform. And then again, the chambers throughout local chambers and national chambers have written letters to all of us in Congress. So there's a tremendous bipartisan support. People who, regardless of their political affiliation or registration, they are definitely for comprehensive immigration reform. And the bottom line is, it's the best thing we could do for our economy.
Well, great. I do hope that the committee will make it in order to give the members of the body an opportunity to use a bipartisan mechanism to pay for a tax cut that I think that almost all of us agree on the merits of should be extended. It's just a question of how we will do so without increasing our deficit, which is the last thing we should be doing at this juncture. I'm happy to yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Texas does not seek time. Mr. Cardenas, thank you very much for not only appearing today, for you placing yourself and your experiences on the line with us today. Anything you have in writing will be entered into the record if you leave it for the stenographer. We appreciate it. The gentleman is now excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This closes the hearing portion of H.R. 4438, American Research and Competitive Act of 2014. Chairman would now call up H.Res. 565, Committee on Judiciary, the young chairman of the committee from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte. Chairman Goodlatte, representing the Homeland Security and the Democrats, will be the gentlewoman, Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee. And we're delighted that you're with us at this time. I do not believe at this time that the gentleman is the chairman of the Oversight Committee. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Evidently, the gentleman. We're going to do all these together. Thank you very much. The gentleman, Chairman Issa, would be encouraged to grab a chair. The gentleman, Mr. Cummings, would be invited to grab a chair. The gentleman, Mr. Conley, would be invited to grab a chair. Thank you very much. We'll now move this around a little bit. It will be very comfortable, and we will make sure that the gentleman, Mr. Issa, shares his. It is just like a family reunion. Okay. Remind me in a little bit then. I want to welcome all 5 of you to the committee. I think each of you have been to the Rules Committee before. You know that we count on each of you, not only with your expertise and your expert witness statements that you make, but also we appreciate you as a part of this body. The Rules Committee is intensely interested in your continuing dialogue that you have with us. The gentleman, Mr. Cummings, has been up quite a few times lately. Elijah, it's good to see you again. I also know that Mr. Goodlatte's been sitting around for a long period of time. Mr. Chairman, thank you for being here. As always, all 5 of you, if you have anything in writing that you'd like to add to the record, without objection, we'll enter that in the testimony. The gentleman, the chairman of the Committee of Judiciary, is now recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and it's a pleasure to be here before the Rules Committee with all of my colleagues here on both the Judiciary Committee and the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, or in the case of Mr. Issa, on both committees. Chairman Sessions and Ranking Member Slaughter, thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of this important resolution. On May 10, 2013, the Internal Revenue Service admitted to inappropriately targeting conservative groups for extra scrutiny in connection with their applications for tax-exempt status. President Obama denounced this behavior as outrageous and unacceptable and pledged that the administration would, quote, find out exactly what happened and would make sure wrongdoers were held fully accountable. In testimony before my committee on May 15, 2013, Attorney General Holder testified that the Department of Justice would conduct a dispassionate investigation into the IRS's admitted targeting of conservative groups. The Attorney General promised me and the members of the Judiciary Committee that, quote, this will not be about parties, this will not be about ideological persuasions, and anyone who has broken the law will be held accountable, end quote. Unfortunately, that appears to be where the administration's commitment to pursuing this investigation ended. We have all seen testimony from conservative groups stating that they had yet to be interviewed by the Department of Justice more than a year after the allegations came to light. Additionally, the administration has sought to undermine whatever investigation the Department of Justice was conducting at every opportunity. Earlier this year, unnamed DOJ officials leaked information to the Wall Street Journal suggesting that the department does not plan to file criminal charges over the IRS's targeting of conservative groups. When asked who leaked this information to the media and if the department plans to prosecute the leaker, Attorney General Holder admitted that he has not looked into this leak. Additionally, on Super Bowl Sunday, President Obama stated that there was, quote, not even a smidgen of corruption in connection with the IRS targeting. Finally, as we all know, the Department of Justice appointed Barbara Bosserman, an attorney in the notoriously politicized Civil Rights Division, to head the investigation. Ms. Bosserman donated more than $6,000 to President Obama's campaigns in 2008 and 2012. The relevant regulations require the Attorney General to appoint a special counsel when he determines, 1, that criminal investigation of a person or matter is warranted, 2, that investigation or prosecution by the Department of Justice would present a conflict of interest for the department, and 3, that under the circumstances it would be in the public interest to appoint an outside counsel. There is little doubt that these requirements have been satisfied. First, as shown in the Ways and Means Committee's referral letter to the Department of Justice, there are serious allegations that IRS officials, including former official Lois Lerner, violated federal law by targeting conservative groups and by releasing confidential tax information to the media. We also know that troubling information continues to come to light about this matter, including that the Department of Justice considered prosecuting conservative groups for engaging in political activity that is legal under federal law. Second, it is clear that a conflict of interest exists between DOJ investigators and this administration. As a legal matter, determining whether a conflict of interest exists requires a determination of whether one's external interests are likely to impact the exercise of independent professional judgment. In addition to Ms. Bosserman's clear conflict of interest, this administration's repeated actions to undermine the DOJ investigation, in particular, the President's prejudging the results of the investigation, have created an indisputable conflict of interest. Third, it is equally clear that appointing an outside special counsel to investigate this matter would be in the public interest. The American people are very concerned that their government has targeted individual citizens for harassment solely on the basis of their political beliefs. The American people deserve to know who ordered the targeting, when the targeting was ordered, and why, under the circumstances, this administration cannot credibly investigate this matter. It is time for the Attorney General to appoint an independent, professional, special counsel to get to the bottom of this. Thank you, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions.
I thank the gentleman for his statement, and I would now defer to the gentlewoman from Texas representing the Homeland Security Committee, and I assume the Judiciary Committee. Gentlewoman from Texas is now recognized.
Chairman, thank you very much. To the ranking member, thank you for the courtesies extended to all of us. We all recognize the length of time that you spent on this committee, and we thank you so very much. I am presenting these remarks today regarding HRES 565 on behalf of the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the Honorable John Conyers, and myself. As a matter of history, let me just comment with respect to what we have already accomplished. More than 30 independent legal experts have now concluded that the contempt proceedings as proceeded on by the Oversight Committee are constitutionally deficient, including 2 former House counsels and former Supreme Court clerks and Democratic and Republican legal experts. Another point of fact that has already been established that the evidence showed that a self-described conservative Republican manager in the Cincinnati office of the IRS oversaw employees who first developed the inappropriate search items identified as a TIGTA, and that those search terms applied to groups across the political spectrum, including those with words progressive and occupy in their names. For those of you who are aware, and I might say for those of us who may be unaware of the legal authority undergirding this resolution, it is based on a series of regulations promulgated by the Justice Department. Premise, of course, is to determine conflict of interest, among others. In pertinent part, Section 600.1 of the Code of Federal Regulation authorizes the Attorney General to appoint a special counsel when he or she determines that criminal investigation of a person or matter is warranted under certain specified circumstances. In sum, these circumstances are that the Justice Department's prosecution would present a conflict of interest for the Department and that it would be in the public interest for a special counsel to assume responsibility for this matter. The measure pending before you today, however, utterly fails to meet any of these criteria. The sponsors of HRES 565 make bald, unsupported conflict of interest allegations by a mid-level career attorney whose only fault was to engage in lawful and constitutionally protected political activity. In fact, the ranking member of the Oversight Government Reform Committee earlier today issued a report detailing that committee's year-long investigation of the IRS efforts to screen applicants for their tax-exempt status. Among the report's principal findings are that over the course of lengthy and detailed interviews, 39 witnesses involved in this matter have been interviewed. Absolutely no evidence of White House involvement was identified. Not a single one of these 39 witness interviews revealed any evidence of political motivation. These interviewees included IRS employees who identified themselves as Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and others who had no political affiliation. Another fact that the supporters of this measure ignore is that there is already an ongoing, thorough investigation by the Justice Department in this matter. Might I say to my colleagues that all of us have 201 mostly agreed that Justice Departments and Republican and Democratic administrations have mostly been held to a standard where we respect the work of those Justice Department lawyers and their integrity on investigation matters. Indeed, Section 602 of the Code of Federal Regulations explicitly authorizes the Attorney General to direct an initial investigation in lieu of appointing a special counsel to determine whether grounds even exist to warrant the appointment of a special counsel. So what is this resolution really about? To begin with, unfortunately, it appears to be pure political theater. This is demonstrated by the fact that the House leadership is using a very unusual procedural mechanism to get their issues before the American public. rather than simply writing a letter to the Attorney General asking him to appoint a special counsel, done many times since I've been in the United States Congress, which is a time-honored way to do this. They've resorted to using a resolution that is guaranteed to take up time on the floor away from extending unemployment, passing comprehensive immigration reform, and helping those who need a raise in the minimum wage, and to get C-SPAN coverage. Even the Wall Street Journal editorial board, which is not a partisan or a bastion of liberalism, noted in an editorial published a year ago that calling for a special prosecutor is a form of cheap political grace that gets a quick headline at the cost of less political accountability. Another sentence says that Republicans are predictably leading this call for a special prosecutor against a Democratic administration, as the Wall Street Journal says, but in this one case in which the GOP should hope it doesn't get its way. The Wall Street Journal continues to say that Congress can do the investigating first, and if it discovers criminal behavior, it can make that known and refer those cases and evidence to Mr. Holder, who will then be accountable as the lead law enforcement officer of the nation and then can be held accountable. Unfortunately, the real scandal here is that this foolhardy witch hunt directed at the IRS has cost American taxpayers well in excess of $14 million. Money that we all know could have been spent better spent. Again, we are respecters of the Constitution and due process. We want the facts to be held, and those that are responsible for untoward behavior, criminal behavior or otherwise, to be held accountable. We have laid out the format in which this could be done. Now we're sitting before the Rules Committee with legislation when a simple phone call or letter might be appropriate to request officially that a special prosecutor be appointed. We're wasting limited floor time on this unfortunate charade, rather than taking up the issues that the American people are still looking for us to do. I've already mentioned the broken immigration system, but we want to create jobs as well, and we certainly want to increase the minimum wage for a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. I thank the committee for allowing me, for your indulgence and courtesies, and I happen to think we could find common ground and move beyond this resolution and work together to do what is right on behalf of the American people. I thank you for your courtesies.
Thank the gentlewoman for her testimony. I would now defer to the gentleman from California, the chairman of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, gentleman, Mr. Rice. Gentleman,
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Ranking Member Slaughter. I do serve on both the Judiciary Committee and the Oversight Committee, and I take serious both of these referrals in front of you today. And I might note that the Ways and Means Committee has done a criminal referral. So ultimately, we have had another committee, not represented here, do a thorough investigation, including documents that the public would not ordinarily be able to see, and made a determination. I'm here with a very regretful referral, one that our committee found necessary to do because Lois Lerner appeared before our committee and spoke, represented by counsel, spoke a long opening statement in which she detailed her innocence and detailed what she had and hadn't done. She then asserted her Fifth Amendment rights, something that we were told she was going to do, and did not expect a long opening statement detailing her innocence. I then asked her questions, and she answered those questions. Already under oath, already having asserted Fifth Amendment, she chose to answer some additional questions. We recessed the committee, went to House counsel, truly the only independent person paid to answer those questions, and we got a resounding, consistent, that in fact, at least as to the questions asked and answered, the documents that she had asserted were true and correct, that all of which were on the subject of the hearing, that she owed us answers to those questions. She refused to answer. On April 10th, we voted by a vote of 21 to 12 to hold her in contempt. But that's not the whole story. The story includes that Lois Lerner, in the intervening period, gave testimony, according to her attorney, in front of a public press, to the Justice Department without asserting any Fifth Amendment rights, answered their questions, but won't answer Congress's questions. More importantly, as importantly, her attorney, when she returned, had asserted that she would speak. Then, feeling that, according to her attorney again, she would not get a fair hearing, she chose not to. Now, the definition of contempt by any reasonable stretch for a common non-lawyer is contempt for the office, contempt for the body. And Lois Lerner clearly showed that, and the vote reflected that contempt. Even today, we stand ready, willing, and interested in receiving true and honest testimony from Lois Lerner. That would go a long way toward us understanding why someone who all evidence points to active and pervasive involvement in that targeting of conservative groups might have an explanation that we could hear. She might have an explanation for many things, including her speech at Duke University, including her leaking, in violation of the law from my understanding, or at least of regulations, her leaking a upcoming Inspector General report. Now, a lot of people over the next couple of days, certainly tomorrow, are going to constantly talk about a broader group of issues. The Rules Committee, at least as to the contempt resolution, doesn't have anything broad. The question is, did a committee issue a lawful subpoena? Did she respond? Was she sworn in? Did she give testimony? There's no debate on any of that. Did she assert her Fifth Amendment rights properly? And did she stick to them? Our House counsel, who's not a partisan, he served under Speaker Pelosi, Speaker Hastert, and now Speaker Boehner, said, yes, she did. That's why it's referred. It's not referred because we want it. The fact is, we want to be able to ask her questions directly related to the testimony she already gave. That's really all that we're going to be hearing. Certainly, we've issued a 141-page report, we've issued supplementals, and we continue to do the investigations. I want to close by simply saying to all of you, this is not where we want to be. Where we want to be is to find out why she did the various actions she did, which she asserts in front of us under oath. She broke no regulations, she broke no rules, and clearly the facts show that she did certain actions. That's what we want. We would much rather, like any judge in any courtroom, we'd much rather have the witness answer the questions than hold them in contempt. We'd much rather that the House of Representatives enjoy the same level of respect under the Constitution that Eric Holder's Department of Justice obviously enjoys in her making testimony between her first appearance before us and her second. And I'd like to ask that all my opening statement be placed in the record.
Without objection, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. I'll answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cummings, you're now recognized, and thank you so much for being here with us today. The gentleman represents the Government Reform and Oversight Committee's ranking member. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, my ranking member, and to all the members of the committee. I want to make it clear that I oppose this proposal for a very simple reason.
I'm sorry. I believe Chairman Nice's resolution to hold former IRS official Lois Lerner in contempt of Congress is legally deficient, will likely fail in court, and should not come to the floor of the House. More than 30 independent legal experts have now come forward, and I do say independent, to conclude that this contempt resolution is fatally flawed. They include 2 former House counsels, 3 former clerks to the Supreme Court justices, 6 former federal prosecutors, and law professors from Yale, Stanford, Harvard, Duke, and Georgetown, as well as the law schools of several Republican members of the Oversight Committee, including Temple, University of Michigan, University of South Carolina, George Washington, University of Georgia, and John Marshall. They also include both Democrats and Republicans. I would like to read some examples of their conclusions. Stan Brand, who served as House counsel from 1976 to 1983, concluded that Ms. Lerner's brief introductory statement was merely a, quote, profession of her innocence, and that it did not constitute a waiver of her rights.
He also concluded that Chairman Issa's failure to comply with constitutional due process requirements is the second hearing, and it is and I quote, fatal to any subsequent prosecution. Thomas J. Spurlock, who served as House counsel from 1994 to 1995, concluded, and I quote, I do not believe that the proper basis for contempt of Congress charge has been established, end of quote. And J. Richard Brunton, a member of the Republican National Lawyers Association and a professor at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law, concluded that Ms. Lerner, and I quote, would likely have a defense to any ensuing criminal prosecution for contempt pursuant to existing Supreme Court precedent, end of quote. I did not pay these lawyers. I did not hire them. They do not represent me. They are independent, and I ask for their opinions on these significant constitutional issues. Some of these experts spoke to the issue of the waiver itself. They explained that a witness does not waive the Fifth Amendment simply by professing her innocence. As the Supreme Court held in 1949, and I quote, testimonial waiver is not to be lightly inferred, and the courts accordingly indulge every reasonable presumption against finding a testimonial waiver, end of quote. More than 30 of these constitutional and criminal law experts reviewed the entire record before the committee and concluded that Chairman Issa botched the contempt proceedings in his rush to adjourn the committee's hearing on March 5th, 2014, when he cut off my microphone, drew his hand across his neck, and ordered the Republican staff to, quote, close it down, end of quote. These experts conclude that the chairman failed to comply with the Constitution's requirements to overrule the witness's Fifth Amendment assertion and order her to answer his questions. That's the law. After I raised concerns about the legal flaws identified by these experts, the chairman sought an opinion from House counsel to justify his actions after the fact. I believe the House counsel's office is filled with very dedicated lawyers, but they are tasked with representing their client. In this case, their client is Chairman Issa. Their opinion must be recognized for what it is, a legal brief written in preparation for defending their client's actions in court. Their arguments have also been addressed by independent experts. For example, Mort Rosenberg, a 35-year veteran of the Congressional Research Service, called them meritless. Because of the gravity of these constitutional issues, I asked Chairman Issa to hold a hearing with legal experts. I wrote to him and I said, and I quote, I believe every committee member should have the benefit of the testimony from legal experts on both sides of this issue to present and discuss the applicable legal standards and historical precedents regarding Fifth Amendment protections for witnesses appearing before Congress. And the quote, for more than 9 months later, Chairman Issa still refused to hold a hearing with any legal experts on this issue. Finally, in my opinion, voting on this resolution without the benefit of even a single hearing with expert testimony not only undercuts the legitimacy of the resolution itself, but it jeopardizes the constitutional protections of all Americans in the future. Because of these deficiencies, I did not support this resolution in the committee, and I cannot support this rule today, and I thank you.
Mr. Cummings, thank you very much. I understand that I invited 5 people up to the table. I understand that 4 have spoken at this time. I also need to advise the panel that we are at 0 minutes left, and I'd like for us to know that we have 3 votes that have to be made on the floor. I would expect that all 5 of you would come back and allow Mr. Conley the opportunity to give his testimony, that you'd make yourself available for questions. And so what we will do at this time, the chairman's ruling, that we will come back at the about 3 minutes after the last vote begins. And so subject to that, we will go ahead and come back at the last vote. Thank you very much.
Okay, fine. No, and I want to read it.
Committee will come to order, and thank you very much for coming back. The chair is aware that we're trying to deliver water to the witness table. Mr. Conley, thank you for taking time to come back. We recognize that your feedback to us as a member of the committee and Foreign Affairs Committee is very important. And Ben, thank you very much for the water. We'll let you sneak around there. And Mr. Conley, we'll let you get your liquid. And if I could please remind the witness that it would be helpful to the committee if you do feel free to turn on your microphone and speak as closely into it as you can. And without objection, anything the gentleman has in writing will be entered to the record. If I could have you push that water all the way forward. There you go. Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the chair and the distinguished ranking member, my friend Mrs. Slaughter, and the members of the committee. And thank you for your service to this body. You put in incredibly long hours, and it's sometimes I'm sure, a thankless task, or it seems to be, but I assure you your colleagues appreciate the work you do. Mr. Chairman, I have no illusions about the fact that the vote tonight on the contempt citation, the rule governing the contempt citation of an American citizen, Lois Lerner, is going to be along party lines and is preordained, irrespective of what... I'm sorry? Yes, it is, ma'am. Okay. Irrespective of what I might say, but I would pray the indulgence of the committee nonetheless to at least consider the case history and the constitutional arguments against taking such action. As the Supreme Court held in the seminal United States versus Quinn case in the 1950s, which I believe is one of three foundational rulings that establish a broad judicial interpretation of the Fifth Amendment that applies today. And I will quote from this ruling, it lays to rest, in my view, any questions over whether Ms. Lerner was entitled to exercise her Fifth Amendment rights before our committee. And I quote from the ruling of Quinn, the privilege against self-incrimination is a right that was hard-earned by our forefathers. The reasons for its inclusion in the Constitution, one of only 10 rights enumerated, and the necessities for its preservation are to be found in the lessons of history. As early as 1650, the court goes on, remembrance of the horror of Star Chamber proceedings a decade before had firmly established the privilege in the common law of England. Transplanted to this country as part of our legal heritage, it soon made its way into various state constitutions and ultimately in 1791 into the Federal Bill of Rights. The privilege, the court stated, was generally regarded then as now as a privilege of great value, a protection to the innocent, though a shelter to the guilty, and a safeguard against heedless, unfounded, or tyrannical prosecutions. It wasn't to protect angels. It was to protect people who, in fact, were not angels. Co-equally with our other constitutional guarantees, the self-incrimination clause must be accorded liberal construction in favor of the right intended to secure. Such liberal construction is particularly warranted, the court found, in the prosecution of a witness for a refusal to answer, since the respect normally accorded that privilege is then buttressed by the presumption of innocence accorded a defendant in a criminal trial. To apply the privilege narrowly or begrudgingly, to treat it as an historical relic, at most merely to be tolerated, is to ignore its development and fundamental purpose in the Constitution. If our House majority is not careful before we know it, we may find ourselves in a hostile environment where the criminal chamber proceedings are the norm, where any chairman is empowered whimsically to compel any American invoking his or her legitimate constitutional Fifth Amendment rights to appear before a committee for no other reason than to be pilloried, embarrassed, or harassed into unknowingly or unintentionally forfeiting the very constitutional rights that our founders established to protect every citizen, even the non-heroic ones, against forced self-incrimination before a government panel. While it may not be intentional, the unfortunate reality is that by pursuing this contempt resolution all the way to the House floor, the majority may inadvertently usher in a return to the very abusive tactics Quinn addressed during the 1950s when a red-baiting member of Congress, Joseph McCarthy, tried and failed to obtain a criminal conviction of an American citizen, another American citizen named Diantha Hogue. In fact, the famous United States v. Hogue case raised nearly identical legal questions to the ones before you today. Like Ms. Lerner, Ms. Hogue repeatedly professed her innocence, unequivocally stating, and I quote, "I have never engaged in espionage nor sabotage. I am not so engaged. I will not so engage in the future, and I am not a spy or a saboteur." And similar to the situation today, Senator McCarthy attempted to argue, as my friend Mr. Issa is trying to argue today, that her statement thus constituted a waiver of her Fifth Amendment rights. And he stated, and I quote, "When the witness says she never engaged in espionage, then she waived the Fifth Amendment, not merely as to that question, but the entire field of espionage." However, when Senator McCarthy held the witness in contempt and sought a criminal prosecution, the United States District Court for the District of Columbia held in the landmark 1956 case, United States v. Hogue, that, quote, "the defendant did not waive her privilege under the Fifth Amendment, and that she was, quote, entitled to a judgment of acquittal on all counts." The fact that there was a prefatory statement declaiming her innocence did not negate in any way, shape, or fashion her Fifth Amendment constitutional right. One need only review long-standing broad judicial interpretations of the Fifth Amendment's privilege against self-incrimination to understand that, as the Second Court of Appeals found in Klein v. Harris, a waiver of this privilege must not be lightly inferred, and that every reasonable presumption against finding waiver should be exercised. That's the standard, not the other way around, not what you're being asked to consider today. You err on the side of her innocence and of her right to waive the Fifth Amendment. That's what the courts have found. Indeed, as noted in the seminal Quinn v. United States ruling, the Supreme Court has held that the Fifth Amendment is a privilege of great value, a protection to the innocent, though a shelter to the guilty, and a safeguard against heedless, unfounded, or tyrannical prosecutions. The bottom line, Mr. Chairman, is that with respect to the question before us today, does a general assertion of innocence by an American citizen who clearly states her intention to invoke and subsequently invokes and never wavers from invoking the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination constitute unequivocally and intelligently waiving said privilege? Our nation's judicial branch clearly spoke in the past and has repeatedly to this very day and clearly provided that answer. The answer is no. I urge the Rules Committee to give careful consideration to what you are about. This is about protecting the rights of American citizens. You began this session today, this afternoon, Mr. Chairman, quite properly, in extolling the virtues of the First Amendment. We have to extol and respect and revere the virtues of all 10 amendments, not just one. With that, I yield back.
Ms. Connolly, thank you very much. I now would acknowledge that all 5 of our witnesses are back, and I want to thank you after the vote for coming here. My first question would be to the gentleman, Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Goodlatte. Mr. Goodlatte, the discussion today is about appointing a special counsel to investigate the targeting of conservative nonprofit groups at the IRS. And there has been discussion about how the Mr. Connolly? Thank you very much. Thank you. And how the President of the United States has evidently rendered an early opinion on this issue, and how the perhaps leaked memos or ideas have been leaked out. It seems to me that Lois Lerner is deeply involved in that also. And I know these two, first of all, this contempt citation as well as this investigation, that they're tied in. Can you tell me exactly what you would expect the Department of Justice to do, the Attorney General of the United States, as it relates to Mrs. Lerner, or Ms. Lerner, I don't know whether she's married or not, Ms. Lerner, as it relates to this contempt hearing also, or are they two distinctly different attributes, and I should not confuse the two.
Well, I think they are distinct, but they are definitely and very clearly related. Obviously, given the length of time that has elapsed, the fact that the parties who were subject to what I consider to be unfair treatment by the Internal Revenue Service not even being interviewed over this lengthy period of time, coupled with the statements and leaks that you referred to, the lack of activity on the individual who was charged with being responsible for this, would all indicate to me that the appointment of a special counsel would be the right thing for this administration to do, no matter what they think are the underlying merits. It would remove that appearance of a conflict. It would remove that taint. As a part of doing so, that special counsel would obviously take a keen interest in the role that Ms. Lerner played in this and her testimony before the Congress, and what testimony could be obtained from her as a part of that investigation. So in that sense, they're leaked, in the sense that she has an obligation to testify truthfully before the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and in my opinion, by her actions in attempting to say I'm not guilty, but nonetheless I maintain my right not to incriminate myself, waived that right, and she has an obligation to testify before the Congress. If the Congress does not hold her to an appropriate standard, then I think we are impinging upon our protection against people not cooperating in legitimate investigations in the future, and therefore I believe that action is also appropriate by the House. They're related, but they're two separate and distinct matters.
Mr. Chairman, the President of the United States has, as I recall, indicated this would be an open, honest administration and would provide transparencies therein in the dealings with the United States Congress. Do you have any reason to believe, either of you two, that this administration engaged with Ms. Lerner to not become compliant, or do you believe that she's out there as an individual?
I do not know the answer to that question. I'll defer to the chairman of the committee that has conducted the larger part of the investigation here, along with the Ways and Means Committee. But I would say that there are other matters before the Congress right now in which, in my opinion, this administration has not been candid or cooperative with the Congress, and I think that's unfortunate because it's not in their interest to maintain that posture.
If the gentlewoman will hold just one moment, please. Mr. Rice, did you have a response?
Briefly, yes. What we know is what her attorney said, which was that she had given testimony without any Fifth Amendment assertion to the Justice Department. They have not released that information. We've obviously asked for it. The indication is sort of that they were sort of a friendly audience that she'll speak to. Well, she won't speak to Congress, even with Mr. Cummings there to blunt or offset anything I might do. In other words, it's a balanced set of questions, as you know. So I think that is certainly a factor. But I think, if I can expand, the fact that this Congress held the Attorney General in contempt and the President himself, in a less partisan, less to the root of what the President wants to achieve, the President asserted a privilege over documents that were clearly about a false statement made to Congress and 10 months of ongoing cover-up. If anything, this committee and this Congress should have considered a special prosecutor for that when the President effectively, through the Justice Department, instructed the U.S. Attorney not to prosecute that contempt. So any belief that something similar isn't going to happen, I think, would beg the question of, look what happened in the case of Fast and Furious, where a U.S. Border Patrol agent was gunned down with weapons that walked to Mexico in a program that people at the Justice Department knew had occurred when they denied it and then covered it up for 10 additional months. And the documents that were withheld were documents pursuant to a subpoena about the false statements made to the Congress and the American people. So I don't think there's any question that the trust but verify, we have discovered trust is not warranted.
Ms. Jackson Lee, you had indicated that you wanted my attention. The gentlewoman would now be recognized. And I thank the gentlewoman for allowing the gentleman to sustain his
I'm willing to
point.
allow all the gentlemen to be able to comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for
Yes,
your
ma'am.
courtesies as well.
Yes, ma'am.
I think when we come to the Rules Committee, it connotes rules and the law. And that is an important standard by which I hope that all of you will look at, except that you do have discretion, weigh points of order. But the provision in which this is premised on is Section 601 of the Code of Federal Regulations, which speaks to the issue of providing a special counsel, special prosecutor that the Attorney General can authorize for a criminal investigation. The question is raised whether there have been sufficient evidence of such. And then the corollary point is that if there is a conflict of interest, then that further argues for possibly the appointing of a special counsel. Nothing has been represented accurately as I've listened to the comments of both Mr. Connolly and the ranking member of the need for a criminal investigation and based upon the premise that, one, there is need for a criminal investigation in this instance, and on the further point that there's a conflict of interest. I think that premise is based upon one of the investigating attorneys happens to be somebody who in his private life has exerted some political activity. But we know that that is not a conflict and that we hold our Justice Department lawyers, they have oaths and standards that they abide by. There is no premise under the underlying rule, underlying resolution, the underlying point in the federal regs for there to be a legislative fix to this. Has there been a request? Has there been proof? Has there been a basis upon which this, and I'm speaking specifically to the question of the special counsel, and has there been proof that there is a need for a criminal investigation that the Justice Department cannot continue to engage in and do accurately and credibly and responsibly? And I don't think that this legislation even has a premise to be passed on to come out of the Rules Committee. There is no premise for it to come out of the Rules Committee.
Ms. Jackson Lee, you had indicated, and I hope I'm not in any way misinterpreting what you said, but that you felt like it could have been a simple phone call, a polite phone call to the Attorney General of the United States with an offer that he would take us up on this as opposed to coming to the Rules Committee with a side to the Congress. Would you make that phone call tonight?
I would certainly do so, but let me clarify and say a simple phone call that a letter is coming, which is also the appropriate protocol to request a special counsel. So we can make it together, but I think the point is that a resolution on the floor of the House is not necessary, and we have gone over this in the past. We passed legislation, I think, last February on this very same point. So they're not abiding by the regs that have been established on which to call for a special counsel.
Ms. Jackson Lee, I would actually like to take you up, and this happens often as people come to the committee. We try and work through our differences, and I would encourage you and I to meet as early as you'd like this evening when we get out, or as early in the morning to place the call to the Attorney General, and I'd like to give the Attorney General an offer that he could take that would avoid this. And so I will make arrangements as quickly as we get out of here to get in touch with you for the purpose of a call to the Attorney General, and I thank you for this gracious
What I would suggest
offer.
to you, what I would suggest to you is, if we both make the call, you may have one position, I may have another.
Well, I think the call is that we would ask the Attorney General politely that we believe, without moving forward on the floor of the House of Representatives, if he would agree to move forward in his investigation and to understand more about this. That would certainly help clarify the issue, and I thank the gentleman very much. Mr. Connolly, I got one more question. I'll leave you alone.
Mr. Chairman, if you would indulge me, I would be clear to say that my call would be to ensure that the Attorney General has the right to make his decision and review the facts. I'd be happy to join you on that call.
I thank the gentleman, and gentlewoman, I'll be trying to get together with her so we'll get out here. Mr. Connolly, I have not taken many constitutional law classes because I'm not a lawyer. I've taken them in college, but I was unaware of the case or the person that you spoke of, the gentlewoman Was she a government employee?
I believe she was.
You believe she was?
No, she was not.
She was not. Mr. Connolly, I would simply say to you that the gentlewoman that we're speaking of is actually serves at the pleasure of the people of the United States, and I believe has a duty and an obligation to perform her duties in a fair and efficient manner. And I believe that she should be entitled to the law. But I would say to you that in this case, I believe that a person who works for the federal government should have also a standard of performance as a result of their obligation to work for the people of the United States. And so that was one question that I had. So I'd love for you to cite a government employee in this relationship as opposed to a private citizen.
Yeah, I would just comment, Mr. Chairman. I don't think that we have a duality in the United States in terms of our rights constitutionally.
I admitted that.
But
I'm looking for someone who had a duty and an obligation to the performance of their duty.
I think we in Congress, sir, have a duty and an obligation to protect those sacred constitutional rights.
I agree.
And trampling them just because one happens to be a federal employee or a former federal employee, and an unpopular one at that, apparently, is not justified, Mr. Chairman. And that's why I'm urging this Rules Committee to think very long and carefully about the implications of holding an American citizen in contempt, because we determine unilaterally on a party line basis in our committee that she has waived her Fifth Amendment rights.
And I respect that. My point is that if you had given me a case of an employee of the federal government who in the process and duty of their obligation in performing their duties asserted such, it would have helped me in my thinking. That's all I'm saying.
If I could,
gentlemen, Mr. Issach.
I appreciate it. Mr. Connolly made a very eloquent speech about a not so long ago event, but the facts are different, and different cases make different case law, as we've seen in time and time again, including Citizens United, which is at the heart of the President and Lois Lerner's objection to what these conservative groups were doing. The fact is that the Fifth Amendment is a pretty darn important thing, and we respect it. So is the Sixth. Your right to have counsel. That's why the Miranda ruling was so critical. Mrs. Lerner is, in fact, an attorney. She was represented by one of the prominent counsels, another attorney. She had asserted that she planned to assert her Fifth Amendment rights, and we called her to give her one more chance to speak or not speak. She had every right and warning to say nothing other than, "I refuse to answer." To our dismay, she made a long opening statement in which she asserted in detail, Mr. Trey Gowdy, I think, counted it as 17 separate assertions, and then she asserted her Fifth Amendment rights when I asked a question. I then asked another question about previous assertions, and she reasserted effectively affidavits by things she had said. So the case is certainly not the same as somebody being hauled before the Congress and badgered and having said, "I'm innocent." It's not the same as somebody who on the street gets pulled over by a cop who suspects him of a crime, and without telling them about Miranda and without a counsel there, ask them a question and they say, "I didn't do it." There is a big difference, and the facts are so different that even if Mr. Connolly's case law, as it is case law, the facts of this will lead to a very different decision before the court, even if there's some merit to the incredible amount of difference between House counsel's opinion, including how we proceeded on that day in which we brought her back. The fact is that either way, as far as we can tell, it's worthy to go to the court, which is where we want to send it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Cummings?
Thank you very much. Most respectfully, Chairman Sessions, we live in a country where you don't lose your rights when you become a public employee. You don't. said we don't. I have the same rights as you. The man out on the street working at the delicatessen, he has the same rights. So, and we have a situation here, and I listened to Mr. Chairman Issa. I wanted you to think about what he just said. We're here he's saying that basically Ms. Lerner waived her right not to incriminate herself. Think about these facts. As he said, her lawyer writes a letter to the committee saying she's going to take the Fifth. She comes in and says she's taking the Fifth. While she's in the room, the lawyer's sitting right behind her, advising her. And a very learned counsel. So you could look at it from the other standpoint. She's come in there with counsel, with the advice of counsel, and the whole case that Mr. Conley is referring to, I think it is right on point. But first you got to start off by saying you don't lose your rights because you're a public employee. Once you get past that and you look at what happened here, again, I think the case is right on point. Now, the courts have been they've really guarded these rights and this particular one very carefully. And the courts have said that when it comes to testimonial waiver, there's a very, very strict, and as a matter of fact, they basically are not anxious to see that happen. The courts have also said that when you're talking about the waiver of Fifth Amendment rights, we should not be caught up in a gotcha kind of situation. And so, I just think that we've got I hope that all of us will keep in mind, no matter what happens here today, that no one in these United States who is a citizen gives up any rights gives up their constitutional rights when they become a public employee.
Thank you very much. Let's not wander past.
I'm not trying to wander past, but that's what you started on.
Well,
I thought it was important.
As a matter of fact, I tried to clarify it, not wander past. I think it's wholly inappropriate to haul a private citizen into Congress and accuse them of being a communist, as opposed to holding a public official and bringing them to Congress to answer questions about their performance of their duty. Those are two entirely different circumstances. And I tried to clarify that, and all I asked was the question, was the person that they were speaking of a government employee or not? Because I believe it is unprecedented. It would be today, too, to bring a person off the street and accuse them of being a communist, as opposed to a government employee about the performance of their duties. And I do not in any way try and say that anybody should not be given the Fifth Amendment. I simply asked the question, and I was hoping that the gentleman would say, in the performance of their duties is how it would be answered, and in fact, it did not apply. Thank you very much. If the gentleman, I don't think we're in a disagreement as to my words or yours or our intent.
Very well.
Well, there would be no.
I want to stay within the parameters that you set. I think that you clarified it. And Lawrence, we're in agreement that as a government employee, I do not give up my rights.
There was nothing that I stated that would be otherwise. I simply asked the question about whether we were speaking about a government employee.
And I think just one other thing, Mr. Chairman. As I listened to Mr. Conley, I was reminded that this is so much bigger than this. This is not just about Lerner. This is about people's constitutional rights. And I think that we have to guard those rights, and it not become, as in the words I'm paraphrasing, normal to to let them go. In other words, that we cannot have that.
Yes, the right we're talking about is self-incrimination.
Yeah, but all
that's,
right.
that's what we're talking about. I agree with that, but in this case, against self-incrimination. And so I do get that.
But, Mr. Chairman, could I, just a factual?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Gentleman's recognized.
Just double checking. I was wrong in saying Ms. Hogue was a government employee, but she was a government contract employee. And she was represented by counsel, and she was testifying before Congress, just for the record.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate all our colleagues being here today. I have no questions.
Gentlewoman yields her time. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I in no way would defend Lois Lerner because of the mismanagement that I think she performed, but I certainly defend to the very fiber of my being her right to invoke the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination. And I couldn't agree more with what you just said, Mr. Cummings. What we're doing here is far more serious than what we were talking about this whole idea before this committee. And I like to break it down. I guess there were two appearances that she made. Is that right, Mr. Issa? The first one is that the one that you want to hold her in contempt, or the second one where you cut down, close the meeting? Which one? That was pretty contemptible too, I thought,
Madam Ranking
frankly.
Member, in the second meeting, I determined that she was not going to answer our questions after.
Because she said she wasn't.
Pardon me. After a series of asking her questions and having her repeat, as is seen often, the phrase, I refuse to answer on the grounds that may tend to incriminate me. That's fine. At that point, we had already completed a complete hearing where she was excused. You don't badge your witnesses once you determine that they will not speak further. The precedent and the court, not the court, but the Bar Association here in the district, you have to dismiss them. I dismissed her. I adjourned the hearing. The gavel fell. Upon the gavel falling, the ranking member said, I have a question. I said to the ranking member, we've already adjourned the meeting, but what's your question? The record will show that the ranking member launched into what is at best a diatribe of screaming about the unfairness of the process. He did not ask a question, and the meeting had been adjourned. He did not have a question or a point of order. He could have objected to the adjournment, and that would have been in order. He did not. And the record is complete with the comments he made. The comments were not a point of order or an objection. At that point, we had adjourned. There was no objection to the adjournment. It was in the ordinary course that it was properly adjourned. And I then realized that Ms. Lerner and her attorney were sitting there as part of what could be undoubtedly appear to be a staged event, and they weren't leaving. They didn't want to leave. They wanted to enjoy the ranking member's statements. I then said, his hearing's over and the microphone should be appropriately cut off. Now, you may not like it. I may regret that I didn't say to the ranking member, would you suspend? Would you please offer a point of order? Whatever. But there was no violation whatsoever. And for the gentlelady or my ranking member to continue to assert that is offensive. The record is clear. I adjourned the meeting. The gentleman asked for a question. I said, the hearing's over, but do you have a question? And he did not. He questioned my integrity, perhaps, but he did not have a question. And I thank the gentlelady for giving me an opportunity to make the record clear.
That second appearance of Ms. Lerner she was the only person there that day. Is that
was correct? All other witnesses had been dismissed. She had been subject to recall.
And her attorney, as I understand what I had read, because I certainly was not there, what I had read was her attorney had said if you would give them a matter of days or to get prepared for it, that she would indeed testify. Is that right?
Her attorney had said the following in writing, and those documents have been made available, that she would appear for a deposition but not a hearing. We said that, but he wanted...
But she was at a hearing.
Ma'am, I need to give you a full and complete answer. I think it's important.
No, I want you to do that.
He said she would appear at a deposition but not a hearing, and he wanted a guarantee that she would not appear before a hearing. I could assure her that I would not move to have her before my committee again. I cannot predict the votes of any other committee or even the votes of my committee over my objections potentially. So we explained that I could only say, if I'm satisfied with that, I'm certainly not going to need to call her again, and that should be sufficient. That was not acceptable. He said, well, then I'll come in, but I want a week's delay. And I said, well, because there's been an on-again, off-again assertion, I need you to come in, and I need you to agree that you will testify, but you need a week to prepare, which is what he said, in return for which I'll give you the additional week. I would have given him 2 weeks. But I needed to know that we were not delaying only to have a change of mind or change of heart. He came in that morning, and from what he said to me, and there were conversations with counsel and others, so this is just my impression of what he said in front of others, was that she had changed her mind, that she was very upset about our assertion that there had been any misconduct by her on the Sunday talk show, and that she didn't think she'd get a fair trial, and so she was going to continue to assert the Fifth. At that point, we reconvened the recessed hearing and went through the process of verifying that she was going to do it. It was then, and still is, the committee's desire to know why she did specific actions that are now very well materially in the record. It is within the scope of the advice we got from our House counsel that our questions would be related to the testimony she gave. And that testimony would be, I broke no rules, I broke no regulations, and so on. We would not be looking at the entire scope of everything. We'd only be looking at the testimony she'd given in that hearing, but she refused to do so. And so that's the second one. I will answer a question that I want to make sure everyone understands. We had already determined that she had waived her Fifth Amendment, and we had already voted on that. So she was on notice. And the House counsel, when we prepared my process that I went through a prepared script, was based on the fact there was already not just constructive notice, but an actual vote of the committee in which Mr. Cummings and Mr. Conley had already decided that she hadn't waived, irregardless of what happened in that second hearing. And so she came, she asserted, and there was nothing more to do. She knew that we felt she had waived, and she went ahead and asserted her Fifth, having previously given testimony, not just in her opening statement, but in the follow-up questions before she reasserted in that hearing. And those are the facts of the case.
Now, that was the first hearing, though, you were talking about.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, let me see if I got that correctly. She had said after the first hearing, when she asserted her Fifth Amendment rights, according to her lawyer and what I read, was that she would testify before you, given another week's time to prepare. Is that accurate?
A year after her first testimony, her attorney gave multiple answers. First, that she would only do a deposition, then she would testify, but that she needed an additional week.
Yeah.
Our understanding is she didn't need an additional week. Her attorney had other obligations that made it inconvenient to be there. The fact is, we were willing to grant it, but no different, quite frankly, Ms. Slaughter, no different than if you're supposed to appear in court and you need additional time, you have to go to court to ask for additional time. That's not uncommon. In this case, we were perfectly willing to give the additional week, and her lawyer knew it, but we required that they assert that she was done asserting her Fifth, that she would give testimony. That's all we needed. Gavel in, I need a week, I'll testify then, gavel out. That's all that would have happened. And the lawyer was aware of that. That has nothing to do with what happened that day, because he asserted at the beginning, not because of a failure to get a week's delay, but in fact because of a change of heart. Exactly what we had feared would happen, that she would ask for another week and then she'd have a change of heart, that after a year and votes by the committee, that it was time that she either fish or cut bait on the assertion she'd made under oath repeatedly in front of our committee.
So you subpoenaed her back for the second hearing?
The subpoena was still valid. We had not adjourned. It was in recess.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Cummings, is that your recollection of it? Because I was not there, and let me give my confusion for a moment, if you'd address that. If she said she would only talk before a deposition, but you subpoenaed her back with the first
Ma'am, she was under a testimonial subpoena for a hearing that was in recess. There was no new subpoena.
But you mentioned something about you expected her to answer questions that she had answered in some previous action.
In the first hearing, she gave testimony, as Mr. Gowdy made clear repeatedly. There were 17 different factual assertions she made in that opening statement and the additional answers she gave before, because she spoke, asserted, spoke again, asserted again. Something that the case law is very clear on you don't get to do.
I watched it several times. It seemed to me that it was very much quicker. But Mr. Cummings or Mr. Conley, Mr. Cummings, you go first.
The first hearing. You watched the first hearing?
No, yes.
I'm describing the first hearing.
Well, I saw the television reenactment, when they filmed it to see it later.
I really want to try to do what the chairman said, try to stay within a narrow balance here. But
well,
really,
I don't want you to do that.
Okay.
I want you to tell me what went on.
Okay. Well,
I don't know what the boundaries are.
On the second hearing,
apparently that we give up our constitutional rights.
On the second hearing, you have to understand what happened.
I want to.
No Democrat had an opportunity truly to say one syllable.
At the hearing?
At the hearing. Now,
how long did that hearing last?
Well, Mr. Eisen must have asked at least 7 or 8 questions. And one of the questions, by the way, and I don't have the transcript in front of me, but one of the questions was about the attorney requesting a week to delay. I don't exactly remember what it was. And it's interesting, what Chairman Eisen did is he predicted in his head what I would say, and I think that's part of the reason why he cut me off. But the more important thing is that there are certain things that he was supposed to do, according to case law, before the second hearing was adjourned. He was to demand, he had to get the assertion from Ms. Lerner that she was indeed asserting her Fifth Amendment right, and then he had to overrule that, and then he had to order her to answer the questions so that she would know exactly what the consequences of refusing to answer were. The case law is abundantly clear. 30 experts have said that was a botched job, and the reason why is because the courts want to make sure that if someone is giving up their Fifth Amendment right, that they are clear as to the consequences that are going to come to them. And so, yes, it is true that House Counsel gave Chairman Eisen an opinion after we had gotten 30 independent lawyers to give us opinions on what happened. And again, I reiterate, House Counsel, very good people, very talented lawyers, but they've got to go into the court and defend their client. So they're not going to necessarily write something that's in the opposite. And by the way, it came after everything was basically over. So it's the other thing that happened that was very interesting. I just learned it a moment ago. This whole question of the interaction between the majority and Mr. Eisen and his staff and the witness, Ms. Lerner and her people. There's several things that he said here that I didn't even know about until I'm sitting here hearing it right now. I didn't know that there was a discussion earlier that day.
Tell me what they were.
Well, I'm just what he just said. He said they had a discussion.
If they had a discussion.
I'm talking about what he just said. I'm just learning it myself.
So you didn't, you
I was not aware of that.
Not in on any of that.
No, we weren't aware of a discussion that happened that day. That's what he just said. Now, and again, keep in mind, I was asking, at the end of the hearing, I wanted to get some information. One of the things I would have loved to have heard is why aren't we granting a 1-week delay so that we can get the testimony? But apparently he has some information that I didn't have. It would have been nice to be able to get an answer to that. And so it's, again, but I still go back, Madam Ranking Member, to the whole idea that this boils down to 2 things. One, was there a waiver of her Fifth Amendment rights. And what we and the experts have said is that she did not waive. Mr. Issa, Chairman Issa, keeps talking about the 17 assertions. Well, the case law is clear. You know, she can, and the whole case I think is quite on point. I think there were 6 or 7 in that case, but saying that I'm innocent, I didn't do anything wrong, that is not enough to waive your constitutional right. The second thing is what I told you a minute ago. There were certain things that he was supposed to say. These are not magic words. This is what the Supreme Court has said you must say. As Mrs. Lee said, we're not here to make up the law. We're trying to obey the law. And that was not done.
And just to make sure that we're clear on 2 factual things that the ranking member may not have been aware of, we have a conference room to the side. The witness was secluded, but the lawyer, Mr. Taylor, came out and was asked in the ordinary course, is your client going to testify or not? And that's when he volunteered that information. The evidence in this fairly substantial set of reports is all about a train of emails back and forth that codify what I told you about the train of she will talk, she won't talk. The case law is not based on the circumstances of some magic word, and the ranking member said it very well. There's no magic word. As a matter of fact, House counsel would tell us, and will be telling in the prosecution of this case, if asked, that we didn't have to call her back to hold her in contempt. We called her back in the hopes that she was going to testify, and quite frankly, the belief that she was going to.
It was your belief that she was coming back to testify.
Look, I said on a Sunday talk show she was coming back to testify because they had said to me in emails that she would. Now,
and Mr. Cummings knew that.
Yes, you knew that she had said she was going to testify.
I know what I saw on television.
You were not told.
Well,
Okay.
The lawyer immediately came out and said it wasn't true. We weren't a part of the process.
Yeah.
Well,
that's part of the problem.
Well, look, I think it's important to have one thing understood. We didn't need to have the second hearing in order to hold her in contempt, because the standard for this attorney and her attorney is, did they know what would happen if she refused to answer and had waived? And the answer is, she did. She is a lawyer. He was a lawyer. They were very aware of that contempt. So there's no magic words. There's only a question in the court's mind is, was she aware of the consequences and still didn't give testimony? She was aware of the consequences and did not give testimony.
But you ascertained that outside the hearing.
The court will decide whether or not she was aware.
That's not what I mean.
Madam Ranking Member, the court will make 2 decisions. Did she waive? And was she aware? And they will make those decisions. You know, one of the problems
you just, I'm not a lawyer, but I understood what you said was that you asked her if she understood the consequences.
No, I did not. What I said is the case law begs the question of, did she understand the consequences? She is a lawyer. Of course, she understood the consequences. Her lawyer understood, and there had been extensive back and forth. They were very well aware that they would be held in contempt. The standard,
I understand that.
The standard is designed to prevent somebody who would have spoken except for being held in contempt.
But tell me how you ascertained that she knew. You asked the lawyer.
She is a lawyer.
No, you said you asked the lawyer?
Ma'am, with rare exceptions, I go out of my way not to speak directly to lawyers. The only reason that I had a direct conversation with that lawyer is because I was in the room with the question of would she testify or not, and he told me that she had changed her mind because she did not respect his body. The point that
but you didn't say it in the hearing. Is that the point I'm trying to make? And that
there was no obligation, ma'am. There's no obligation to have that second hearing at all.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what you need to say.
There is nothing.
Right. Okay. All right. Right.
30 experts, and I just named the law schools. All right. They have made it abundantly, but they say this is not even close.
We wrote letters that let her know that she would be held in contempt. I said words about contempt, and it's in the record. The ranking member says there's no magic word, but then he wants to have a magic word.
The fact is, we didn't need a magic word. We could have simply said, you have to agree to come back or we'll hold you in contempt. We did that in letters. We did not need to have the second hearing. The second hearing was the result of her lawyer's assertion that she would testify. It was a moving target. First it was deposition, then it was she will, but I need a week's delay. All we ever asked is that she agreed that she was going to testify so we wouldn't have a further moving target. And the fact is, it proved that the target was moving. Additionally, the facts in this case show that she had so much contempt for this body that she would testify in front of the Department of Justice without asserting her rights on the exact same questions, undoubtedly, and yet not testify to us. So, Madam Ranking Member, this is a question of whether the court will have the opportunity to determine whether or not she had contempt for you and for all of you, because she had contempt for the body by testifying elsewhere and choosing not to. That is, in fact,
Madam Chairman.
Yeah. I need to know, I think probably the only more embarrassing thing than what we're doing here now is what we're going to do tomorrow on the special select committee. But, Mr. Issa, you've investigated for a year, 39 interviews of IRS and Treasury employees, 530,000 documents, and $14 million. And we're here today. We have not moved an inch anywhere off of this thing in over a year.
Madam Ranking Member, my budget portion that was spent on this is in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I apologize that it takes a lot of money to hide the ball. It takes a lot of money to over-redact. It takes a lot of money to withhold and to study. The fact is, a crime by the Ways and Means Committee, crimes were committed. That was their decision. Mm-hmm. The $14 million for the American people is a small price to pay for their freedom and protecting their First Amendment. But going to your real question, we still do not have all of Lois Lerner's emails.
Yeah.
So when you want to talk about the cost and so on, if they would give us the rest of her emails pursuant to our subpoena, they could at least say, well, we gave you all the documents. The truth is the IRS, the Treasury, has not turned over all the documents as of today. Well, so if you really want to look at this case, what you're going to look at is they have not turned over all of Lois Lerner's documents. What are they hiding should be your question, Madam
Well, here's another one.
I can tell you that if L.C. Hastings was still a federal judge, he'd have held the Department of Justice and the U.S. attorneys and everyone else up and said, wait a second here. Quite frankly, I need those subpoenas be honored by the plaintiff. How could you not have that?
Mr. Issa, 10 months ago, you yourself said on television that you were going to release all 39 interviews with the IRS and Treasury employees 10 months ago, and you haven't released any of those. Why not?
Ma'am, I did not say that. That's not an accurate quote. Would you please find an accurate quote of what I said, and I'll be glad to do it.
All right, I will. Mr. Connolly, you wanted to say something.
Well, Ms. Slaughter, a few observations. I think you're witnessing the problem with the process on our committee, the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Start with fundamental lack of respect, and I want to give you credit, Mr. Chairman. That's not something I see here. Here I see respect, disagreement, but respect. You heard the distinguished chairman when you asked your question, Ms. Slaughter, about cutting off something that went viral, something I can tell you in the room shocked all of us. He referred to the ranking member's attempt to make a statement or ask a question as a diatribe. So much for respect. If I were Lois Lerner's attorneys, I'd make sure she invoked the Fifth too. The idea that Trey Gowdy, apparently's opinion, is now dispositive on all things, including whether she waived her Fifth Amendment right. I have here the transcript from 1954 on the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations of the Committee of Government Operations, in which Lois Lerner not only periodically reminded the committee of her innocence, she answered questions interspersed with invoking her Fifth Amendment right. 2 years later, the court found that did not constitute a waiver. Very similar to the situation we're talking about today. And the final point I want to make, Mr. Chairman, you asked for a case involving government employees in the Fifth Amendment. Got one for you. United States versus Garrity. It's a seminal case of government employees and their Fifth Amendment protections. They were required to waive their Fifth Amendment or face firing. And when it got to court, all convictions were reversed as being unconstitutional. 1967, U.S. versus Garrity. Government employees. I yield back.
Well, tell me.
And by the way, can I ask that this be entered into the record, Mr. Chairman?
Without objection.
Thank you. The transcript.
But I need to know, and Ms. Lee, if you answer this for me, what you expect to happen when this gets to court.
With all,
I'm sure that it will be voted out and probably pass the floor tomorrow.
Well,
for the contempt, but then what's next?
First of all, I think my colleagues are right. Ms. Lerner continues, whether she is a contract employee, whether she's a citizen standing outside, she has due process. All of the preliminary investigation by the Department of Justice and ranking member of the Department of Justice is still investigating this matter. This is what makes the resolution for special counsel almost comical, because they are working. But what I would suggest that would happen, and believe that would happen, is she would have every right to present evidence that this was not a criminal matter if this was a criminal case. Because the Department of Justice has decided early on in the year that they did not see any criminal violations. This resolution, I'm going to the first bill rather, on appointing a special counsel. And so if ultimately there was a special counsel appointed, which I don't believe there's any grounds to do so, Ms. Lerner would not lose her due process rights if she happened to be the individual that would ultimately be decided that would be a defendant in a criminal prosecution. But as I indicated to Mr. Sessions, which I want to be very clear, is that any conversation that I would have with the Attorney General would yield to his judgment that he had an alternative to appointing a special counsel, and that is to continue his investigation, which he is now doing. He does not have to appoint a special counsel, and the Department of Justice, we're not ready to go to court. The Department of Justice has not finished its investigation. I've heard no conclusion. There's no final word from General Holder, and again, this is another attack on the General, as if he is not prepared to lead his department in a fair and impartial way. I also want to make it very clear that in the resolution they point out that one of the lawyers happens to have expressed himself privately, politically. That is in no way equal to diminishing the individual's qualifications for leading an impartial investigation. Unlike the episode with the Bush administration in the absolute pressure on the issue of appointing of U.S. attorneys, questioning them about their viewpoints, not appointing them if they didn't have the viewpoints that the administration wanted it to be. So to your question on the courts, this individual would have every due process right. Preliminarily, if we're speaking about Ms. Lerner, but there are other parties involved, preliminarily, the Department of Justice has already decided there seems to be no criminal investigation. And interestingly enough, to suggest that, since I'm on the bill about the special counsel, to suggest that General Holder's not doing his work, the Justice Department has engaged in conversation with some of the parties mentioned, such as Ms. Lerner. They are doing their work. It is foolish to go forward with a special counsel resolution, and it is also premature because the Department of Justice has not concluded its investigation under Federal Regulation 601 and 602. So we're sort of jumping the gun for the issue of a special counsel, and by and large with my colleagues in holding her in contempt, my colleagues have spoken very eloquently to that point about being held in contempt, because how much more clearly can you get than I am taking the Fifth Amendment? I am taking the Fifth Amendment. And the transcript should be here, as Mr. Cummings has said, because I assume you will see it over and over in the transcript, that she has exercised her Fifth Amendment privilege not to speak.
I will.
You asked the question, what will happen in court? Obviously, one couldn't deign to know what the likely issues are, but you wanted to know what happens after this.
Yes.
We vote on the matter, it passes, and then if anything is to go forward, it would be in the United States District Court in the District of Columbia, and then to the Attorney General, who has been held in contempt by this same committee seeking all this information. therein lies a part of the problem. But that would be the process from us passing this matter.
I'm going to finish up here because there have been several references, though, that the President of the United States was somehow involved in some kind of cover-up or whatever here. I'm going to leave those questions to my colleagues, but Mr. Issa, on State of the Union with Candy Crowley on June 2nd, 2013, you said the transcripts would be made public. Then apparently there were Democrat efforts then to release those transcripts.
Would you mind reading it? Would you mind reading it? Upon completion of the investigation, we planned on making it public. We have not been able to complete it. We do not have all of the data. We're still waiting on that. But more importantly, Madam Ranking Member, the ranking member right over here can release any documents he wants, and he has chosen to do so at times. So the idea that we're somehow holding back the transcribed interviews, the ranking member can release all or part. Candy Crowley was objecting. Okay. Candy Crowley was objecting to the fact that we had given portions of transcribed interviews data to her. And the fact is, we were not going to release our questions and answers in totality then or during the ongoing investigation. It is not appropriate during a civil or a criminal investigation to have your line of questioning made public. The ranking member knows that, and I know that. The fact is, I have no objections to people taking bits of information and putting it out on either side. As a matter of fact, I think it's helpful. I do have a problem before an investigation is concluded to simply have future witnesses know what you exactly verbatim what you've asked prior witnesses. That's just good prosecution.
You did allow selective reporters, however, to look at those.
It has been the policy. It has been the policy of this committee during my chairmanship, during Mr. Waxman's chairmanship, and far back, to in fact allow for the review of information in order for the press to be able to report while maintaining the integrity of the broad question and answer.
But that doesn't strike you as difficult that nobody else knows? But selective members of the press that you decided to see it?
Ma'am?
It was not open, as I understand it, to all reporters.
Ma'am, there were two sides of the aisle. You may have noticed that. Mr. Cummings,
yeah, I sure
Mr.
have.
Cummings is free to do that, and Mr. Cummings releases selected information
Are you free
too.
to do that? You haven't tried to get those transcripts released?
Let me be clear. We have tried to have the electrical vote the other day to have all of the transcripts. I asked to have all of them released. And just go to Mr. Issa, Chairman Issa, made the same arguments that he just made. But we also said redact. Redact whatever you want to. And the reason why we did that is because we were tired of cherry-picked information. We wanted the truth to come out, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Put them all out there. Absolutely. Redact whatever you want to redact so that we don't have the problem. The fact is, and the reason why we issued our report today, by the way, which shows we went through all 39 transcripts.
You've seen them?
Yeah, I've seen them. Oh, yeah. And all those things, and I would invite you to read them, because basically what it says, every single witness says that the White House was not involved in this so-called time, and they say that there was no political influence involved in it. And these are witnesses, I didn't call them. The majority called them. This was their witnesses.
Were you
all 39
witnesses?
I'm sorry?
Were you allowed to call witnesses?
I don't know, sir. Well, I don't think we asked for any.
But the transcript,
they were controlling the process.
The majority and the minority there, and we alternate in 1 hour sessions. So we ask questions for up to an hour. They ask questions for up to an hour. Let's understand one thing that you've been alluding to, and you even said that people down the dais were going to.
No, I said I'd leave it.
Lois Lerner,
they're going to.
Lois Lerner did certain things and said certain things. Other people at the IRS, including former commissioners now, said certain things and did certain things. Our committee is concerned, and I have said that the Tea Party groups that were targeted are certainly adverse to the president. I have never said the president targeted, the president conducted, the president anything. So understand, we are investigating people And our investigation leads to a central hub to a great extent, and her name is Lois Lerner.
My understanding, Mr. Issa, is that they treated everybody pretty much the same way. It was not just.
You couldn't be more wrong. You couldn't be more wrong. We published a long report that makes it clear that progressives were not targeted. They did not see the same treatment that the conservative groups did. Clearly, when you see no conservative groups being granted any approvals, well, other groups, progressive and non-progressive, went through the process, not necessarily in one day or 1 week, but they went through, and they went through pretty straightforward. Asking for the donors list and follow-up questions and a whole procedure of questions, that happened to Tea Party patriot groups. That's who it happened to.
Do you all have anything to say about that?
Yeah, just, the progressive groups who are not subjected to heightened scrutiny by the IRS is another example of my colleagues in the majority ignoring the facts that contradict their political narrative. The terms occupy, Acorn, progressive, were included on the famous BOA list. The terms emerge and progressive were included in a slideshow for training application screeners in 2010 as examples of organizations that might engage in political activity. Let me be clear, and I've said it in the committee. I want everybody to be treated fairly, whether they're Tea Party or Democrat, Republican.
In fact, they should really change that regulation back to the way it was written.
That's exactly right. And if you
exclusively for.
And the IG said that. Yes. That's what the IG said after he did his investigation. We haven't. When I look at what the IG wrote, Madam Ranking Member, from the very beginning, I have not seen anything. I thought apparently he did a pretty thorough job, except he didn't get into the progressive groups.
I don't see why we don't demand that it go back to the way the law was written. There was that interpretation was obviously wrong.
Well, when you look at the transcript, you will see that a lot of people said that there was confusion. They were trying to figure out exactly how to handle these cases so that there would be consistency. They knew that they would be setting precedent, and they wanted to make sure they got it right.
It doesn't make sense to me because there's a great difference between exclusively and primarily.
Yeah.
I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back time. I would encourage all of us, as I believe we're all trying to do, to find useful conversations that we have, and I know all the witnesses are trying to do that, and I know all the members are trying to do that. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really don't have any questions. I just want to thank my colleagues for coming up here and testifying. It's been a very illuminating discussion. It really has been. I've certainly learned some things listening to each of you, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate, look, I understand these are difficult and contentious issues, but I appreciate the manner in which each of you has spoken and presented your points of view. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate very much the manner in which you've presided and allowed the free flow of discussion as we work through this. And so just thank you very much. Thank the ladies and gentlemen for coming up here and testifying. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. It's time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. I'll be brief here. I think one of the problems I think we all should be aware about is the perception that the American public has of the way this place operates. And just even listening to the kind of back and forth here, kind of the lack of respect, the lack of sharing information, especially on an issue of oversight, on investigations, where, quite frankly, you want to make sure that whatever the end result is something that everybody buys into as being legitimate. And this has become so polarized and so politicized. And even by the fact that we're bringing it up this week, this is investigation week. So we're going to begin with the bill on contempt of Congress for Lois Lerner. We're going to do a special counsel to investigate the targeting of so-called conservative nonprofit groups. Then we're going to do Benghazi, I think, tomorrow. This is a whole week of let's investigate the administration. And I'm not saying that this administration is not above making mistakes, but the problem I have with all of this is that the narrative of the majority doesn't seem to fit the facts. And so we're just kind of kicking the ball down the road, potentially violating some woman's constitutional rights. asking for another select committee. Maybe we can get Ken Starr to come out of retirement. He could do another investigation and waste taxpayers' money. You have $14 million already spent on this, and if this goes on much further, it'll be much more than that. But let me just, Mr. Cummings, let me just ask you. I mean, there's a bipartisan staff that interviewed 39 witnesses, right?
That is correct.
Right. Is there any evidence of White House involvement?
None.
Is there any evidence of political motivation?
None.
Based on the evidence in those 39 interviews, what is the conclusion?
It appears to be what I just said from the very beginning, the mismanagement and confusion as to how to deal with these organizations that were seeking tax-exempt status. And that's what, that's what I see.
So part of the solution is to do what Ms. Slaughter said, is to go back to...
they have to deal with that, the rule. They've got to clarify that rule.
The other
and these people were, let me say this, I think a lot of the IRS employees have taken a negative hit when they should not have. These people who came in, basically what they were saying is they left their political hats at the door, and they were just trying to do their job right. And that's what they said. But they needed guidance, and they were a bit confused at times.
And just you had mentioned that there were 30 independent legal experts that concluded that the procedure was botched in the contempt procedure, and you had requested there be a hearing.
Yes. And the reason why, with just the experts coming in, we have a lot of lay people on our committee, and even if you're a lawyer, it's beneficial. Just like Mr. Cole just said, he's learning some things here today. But all we wanted was for them to present their sides of it, so we could get, so the committee, since we're dealing with this very serious issue, would have the kind of information we needed.
And given how politicized this issue is, what would be the objection to a hearing with 30 independent legal experts that had questioned this process? Why would that be such a radical thing to do? Mr. Issa, is there a reason why?
I've held 1 to 2 hearings every week, virtually without fail during my chairmanship, and I don't remember holding a whole lot of hearings on procedural activities that needed to be in place. But quite frankly, the reason we didn't have that hearing is that we went through a ordinary course process. The facts were there. We got an opinion from House counsel ahead of the vote on whether she waived, and that was all we needed. Now, we could have called in all kinds of experts. Both sides could have had experts, and you'd have been doing what you're doing here tonight, trying to litigate a case that's going to be before a judge. Trying to litigate something before a judge. Let me reclaim my time because you're not answering my question. The point, I'm going back to my original point here, is that the way this looks, is it looks so political. You leave this beltway here, and people who are watching this, it looks like it's a political process, pure and simple. Aimed at trying to appeal to the red meat, he's throwing some red meat to the political base, but the facts don't seem to matter. And I guess if we were trying to create the impression that this were really a fair process, that all sides were going to be represented, that some legitimate legal questions on constitutionality were going to be answered. For the life of me, I can't understand why anyone would object to that hearing. Mr. Connolly?
Mr. McGovern, the answer is fairly clear. When you decide to convict somebody in advance of the hearing or of the process, why would you want contrary narratives that could call into question not only your process but your conclusion? So we rely on one House counsel when you are the client, and we ignore 30 others, including previous House counsels, who beg to differ. And we don't even have a hearing to explore it. Right. We don't even have a hearing to explore it. And that, I think, taints the very process we're about here tonight. And that's why, respectfully, I disagree with my friend, the distinguished chairman. I believe there isn't a court in the land that is going to uphold this contempt citation.
No, and I'll just close, Mr. Chairman, by saying that everything around here is very one-sided. I get it. The Republicans control the House. They can do whatever they want to do. But when it comes to investigations, when it comes to looking into matters like this one that are very serious, and believe me, I think I don't care what your political philosophy is. You don't want the IRS targeting you for political motivations. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, I think you need to go the extra mile, to kind of remove it from politics. And it looks like this process has been anything but. And I regret that because I love this House of Representatives. I'm proud to serve here. But boy, I think when we do these kinds of things, it diminishes our credibility. It diminishes this House. And on these things, I really do believe you ought to go the extra mile and make sure that the minority's concerns are accommodated, and that's not the case here. So what's going to happen here is we're going to vote this out of committee tonight. It's not going to be a bipartisan vote, and we're going to go on the floor tomorrow. Probably won't be a bipartisan vote either, and we'll move forward in a way that I don't think reflects very well on this institution. And with that, I give back my time.
Chairman yields back his time.
Mr.
Gentleman will suspend one place. Does the gentleman wish to have additional time?
If I could, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is granted.
I yield to the gentlelady from Texas briefly.
I want to just keep in mind that we do have two legislative initiatives before the Rules Committee. I thank the gentleman for his courtesy. And I just want to make it very clear that all the discussion that is going on speaks volumes for not having a special counsel appointed. But the resolution is expansive enough as it is written, which cites the comments of General Holder, who said he would have a dispassionate, as is quoted in the resolution, investigation. The investigation is not closed. And I want to clarify that the point about the determination of whether or not there will be criminal charges was in actuality a leak. The general is still investigating, has had conversations with McNair. There are other officials as well. And so I want to reaffirm the fact for the resolution dealing with the appointment of a special counsel, we are premature. And there is no basis, no constitutional basis, no factual basis that we are at the point that a special counsel should be appointed by this body when the Attorney General has not had the opportunity to make a determination of such, and there's been no proven evidence of conflict of interest, which is the basis upon which special counsels can be appointed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if I might respond to that. When the Attorney General proceeds for more than a year without speaking to any of the complaining parties and taking their testimony regarding the experience they had with the Internal Revenue Service and their very strongly held contention, supported by a good deal of evidence based upon what the IRS asked for, that they were being targeted and being targeted based upon their political beliefs. That is a failure to take action that requires the Congress to step up and request that a special counsel be appointed. This has other issues related to conflict. The individual appointed by the Attorney General to do the investigation, the comments made regarding this, which I think are very unfortunate in terms of politicizing this by members of the administration. And the best way to take this out of the political arena would be to appoint a professional, independent, special counsel to look into what I think is one of the most serious allegations regarding government malfeasance in a long, long time.
I thank the gentleman, but having lived through a special prosecutor during my tenure in Congress, if you think that removes the politics, then you weren't paying attention. And I strongly disagree with the gentleman. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman now yields back his time. I would encourage each of us, without admonishing anyone, that we are attempting to get our work done this evening, and I would remind us of that. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't feel admonished by that, and I want you to know that I take you at your word. There.
have the great pleasure of serving under Chairman Issa on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and I confess that and I mentioned it to you, Mr. Chairman, when we were talking early on. My plan was that it was going to be President Romney, and we were going to demonstrate that the Oversight Committee is not about Republicans against Democrats or Democrats against Republicans. It's about Article 1 of the Constitution, Article 2 of the Constitution, and us standing up to do the job that we're required to do. When it didn't work out that way in the election process, suddenly everything that I would put in the realm of good government and fulfilling constitutional responsibilities gets dismissed as partisan tomfoolery, and it is disappointing to me. I think back to the very first hearings that you held on this topic. Going back to Mr. Cole learning things here today, the things that I learned, right, where we went from this is a couple of renegade folks in a distant office somewhere to know these are, those folks in the distant office somewhere doing the very best they can with the instructions they've been getting, but there is a list of instructions. And for Pete's sakes, we talk about take our time, do it right. I'm holding hundreds of pages of reports here, and I would say to my friends, if you're interested in whether or not there's a complete record somewhere, don't limit yourself to these several hundred pages. Associate yourself with some of our committee staff over there on OGR, because we will introduce you to the boxes upon boxes upon boxes, arguably room upon room of documentation, not provided by the administration to help us get to the truth, but arguably provided by the administration to obfuscate the truth. I don't envy your path here, Mr. Chairman, because again, no matter how hard you try to fulfill your Article 1 obligations, you'll be dismissed as partisan. But I do want to ask this, because Mr. Connolly certainly affected me with his opening statement, because it is frightening to me as a citizen that as the tale has been told, that the Congress can have a vote and suddenly my constitutional rights are no longer. I just need you to clarify for me, is that what happens on the floor of this House, that we can have a vote and my constitutional rights suddenly disappear?
You bring up the most important question about what's decided here tonight and tomorrow. All we're doing as Article 1 is saying an employee of Article 2, the executive branch, didn't properly assert her rights, even though she was both a lawyer and represented by counsel, and she went out of her way to answer certain questions and make certain statements. And we want Article 3, the federal court, to decide whether or not she waived, and therefore we should be entitled to some answers to our questions about, why did you say at Duke University? Why were you talking about they want us to fix this, and Citizens United, and we need to fix all of this? These things that she had said were what we wanted to ask her, but we also want to ask her about things she said in front of us in this Q&A. The fact is, all we will do tomorrow, if you decide to refer this, and we hold it tomorrow, is we will hold her in contempt. We will refer it for a U.S. attorney to then ask an independent judge, a lifetime appointment judge, to arbitrate this debate, where she's going to continue to say she didn't waive. I'm sure her counsel will assert that. And we bring the facts that we have, and they decide. Nothing could be less partisan than, in fact, to let the federal court decide. I remember the Harriet Miers case. I know that Chairman Goodlatte remembers it very well. It was the other side. It was, in fact, Chairman Conyers who said, we need these people down, and the Bush administration didn't want to. Ultimately, a federal judge did decide that case, or was prepared to decide it, and it's settled. That's all we're looking for. The balance of the three branches cannot exist if we have no ability to enforce, and our only choice is to go to the arbitrators of differences between the two branches, which, in fact, is the federal court. And that's all we're going to do tomorrow, is give the federal court an opportunity. And if Mr. Connolly is correct, and the facts here are substantially similar, and they rule that way, then there'll be strong case law. But she will not answer a single question, I'm sure, until after she knows which way they're going to decide.
It's a source of great frustration to me that the partisan label gets placed on these activities. I have the great pleasure of working with the ranking member. I have great respect for the gentleman from Maryland. And most of what I see in my days are cooperative, collaborative efforts on the things that the OGR committee has to get done day in and day out. It's only when it rises to the level of network news that differences get exposed in this way. And I wish folks could celebrate your collaborative successes in the same way that they draw attention to our differences. But I am grateful to you for your leadership.
I would mention that tonight the U.S. Senate is seeing our HIDE Act. The DATA Act is becoming law. The fact is that Mr. Connolly and Mr. Cummings and the other Republicans on the committee, we do work well on legislation. I have enjoyed working on issues that did not rise to the administration with some, I mean, nobody could have a better partner on trying to get the NFL to get steroids and human growth hormones out of players' bodies than Mr. Cummings. This is a tough one. This is one in which the two sides are very polarized. The statements coming out of the White House and out of minority versus majority are different. But we do need to get to the facts, and I think the other part that Mr. Goodlatte is bringing up, which is an independent prosecutor and a court system would give confidence to people that somebody is looking at this case anew and that it doesn't enjoy some sort of a bias, and do so soon, because nobody can find a scarier organization, I think, at least one without guns, than the IRS. And I'd like us all to have confidence in the IRS again. And if Lois Lerner or somebody else at a level that, you know, is way down there can do this, can do the biased sort of activities that now are clear went on, then the controls aren't there. And we're not getting the controls there until we admit that it actually happened.
Well, far from hearing from folks back home about the partisanship here, what I hear from folks back home is, golly, these things happened a year ago, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, depending on what the topic of the day is, and why are you all moving so slowly and deliberatively? And the answer is because these are serious issues and you would want nothing else from your Article 1 Congress. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Judge Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Issa, did I understand you correctly that the Ways and Means Committee has already determined that crimes were committed?
I believe that they did a referral asserting specifics on their own. Now, that goes for consideration and investigation, so it's a suspicion of, not a finding under the law. I mean, the U.S. Attorney may or may not determine that there were crimes.
All right. Is there an ongoing investigation by the Department of Justice? Never mind about whether or not they are acting expeditiously or not. Is there an ongoing investigation?
Well, the Attorney General claims that there is, but there sure is not much evidence of any activity when
Understood.
The complaining parties are not even being interviewed.
I understand your point of view, but that does not obviate the fact that there is an ongoing investigation.
I guess any time the Attorney General claims there's an investigation, you can and others can say there is, but if there's no evidence of activity,
I would raise it for the reason, if the Ways and Means Committee has made a finding that they feel that there was criminal conduct, and if there is an ongoing investigation, then I join Mr. Connolly. If I were representing Ms. Lerner, I would have said to her point blank that she should assert her Fifth Amendment rights before your committee. And that then leads me to determine what, if anything, Mr. Issa, did you do in the second hearing, the one that has had so much virality and controversy? What did you do, if anything, at that hearing to warn Ms. Lerner that she could be held in contempt?
It was part of my actual prepared statement, and it was read into the record.
But was Ms. Lerner?
She was sitting there.
Yeah, but was she sworn?
She was already sworn. We only recessed. She did not stop being sworn.
So then she was sworn, and you didn't ask her Any questions? Did you ask her her name? Did you ask her her address?
I believe I asked her at least 7 questions.
All right, and her answer was?
She took the 5th.
Then why wasn't that just the end of it all, allowing that she had asserted her Fifth Amendment rights?
As you know, Elsie, Mr. Hastings, if you waive your Miranda rights and you talk to the police and then you clam up, they still use what you said when you waived. So we're not saying that anything as she asserted hers is in question. What is in question is her conduct in a series of statements having said that she was informed and planned and was going to assert her rights. I have to tell you, Mr. Hastings, I was shocked that there was no prepared statement expected. We were shocked when she said, yes, she had a statement. We expected to ask her a question and have her assert and be dismissed.
And you might be permitted to use what, if anything, she said, and I'm sure that would be contemplated. But you also, at that time, had a letter from a lawyer saying that she intended to assert her Fifth Amendment.
That is correct.
Right. And then the question becomes again, what did you do in the way of warning her that she could be held in contempt at that time?
It was in my prepared statement. In the second hearing, are you asking about the first hearing?
As drill, there are magic words.
No, there are not magic words.
Yes, there are.
Well,
there are warnings that are required when you put people under oath. So don't say that you didn't have a responsibility to exercise a warning. You did. And if you did not, then I predict for you, since Ms. Slaughter asked earlier what might happen, when this matter gets to court, I can tell you, based on what I've heard here in this hearing, never mind about not being privy to all that you are privy to, I believe that in pursuing criminal conduct or criminal contempt against Ms. Lerner, that you're going to find that it's going to be dismissed. And that would be my view. What the scandal is and all of this stuff is that there is no scandal. And that what happens is you haven't been able, nobody has been able to tie this to the administration. And just to abuse you all of the notion that it's only Tea Party people that have been investigated, that just simply is not the case. What happens with our arrests, and we should get off of their backs, they're thrust upon during political seasons with immense responsibilities to make a determination as to whether or not organizations qualify under the laws as they're written with reference to 501c3 and c4. I want to make it very clear, I take umbrage for the reason that I belong to Mount Hermon AME Church in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And way before any of this took place, my church was under 2 years of investigation because John Kerry came to church. And there are other conservative churches that have had their charters reviewed by the Internal Revenue Service. So this isn't all about one particular segment of our society. I think the most pertinent thing out of this is what Ms. Slaughter said, and Mr. Cummings agreed, that the law needs to be written clearly so that the IRS and anybody else can have a better understanding. I just, for the life of me, don't believe that in this week what we're doing is handling the business of the people of the United States of America. Like you all, I spent 10 days on the ground in my district, and I had a considerable amount of interface with a variety of people, Democrat and Republican. Nobody said to me Benghazi. Nobody said anything to me about IRS. Nobody said anything about any need for any select committee to investigate anything. Almost all were concerned about jobs, a considerable amount of query about unemployment or benefits for people who have lost their jobs. And here we are about the business of looking for a scandal where there is no scandal, and that is the scandal, that you're spending taxpayer time and money going about looking for something that didn't exist. Ms. Lerner had every right to assert her Fifth Amendment rights. And when she asserted her Fifth Amendment rights, they stand, and I predict for you, in spite of all the hoi polloi here, that when it is in court, and it'll be in court if you all vote it out tomorrow, that you will find that it will be dismissed. And then where are we? With some more political mishmash? Enough already, people.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman seems to have yielded back his time.
Mr. Chairman.
Does the witness have a question?
I do. My question is, Mr. Hastings commented on the question of the investigation ongoing. This is retaining to the special counsel, and my chairman answered it. I'd like to add additional information about the ongoing investigation.
If the gentlewoman will yield for just one moment.
I'd be happy to yield.
Mr. Hastings, would you like to seek additional time? The gentleman's recognized.
And thank you so very much. I think it is important. There's been some comment about whether or not the Justice Department is continuing its investigation. In a letter dated February 3rd, 2014, the Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Cole, responded to a member of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Jordan, regarding witnesses coming before that committee. In a 2014 letter, just a few months ago, the General said that it would be difficult to provide anyone because the Department of Justice ongoing investigation. In addition, there was a comment about the issue of conflict of interest, mentioning an individual who had donated dollars to the a party that the majority would have question of. I think the Deputy Attorney General was particularly eloquent about the conflict of interest, and particularly saying it is more than just someone's preference and donations. It is about a personal and political relationship. They also made reference to the fact that the employee in question was the lead counsel on this investigation, which would then argue for this conflict. And in response, the individual in question, a lady attorney, is in fact a member of the team but is not the leader of the investigation. It speaks to the premise of a special counsel, and it falls short. The resolution falls short because it does not apply to 600-01 or the succeeding regulations in terms of calling for a special counsel. And I just wanted to add that to your question of whether there's an ongoing investigation.
Mr. Hastings, assertions have been made about the fact that somebody might, in their personal capacity, make a political contribution, a partisan political contribution, and therefore that constitutes a conflict of interest. And I want to say to my friends on the other side of the aisle, if you wish to assert that, then you must assert that the TIGTA, that the Inspector General, Mr. J. Russell George, has a profound conflict. This is a man who made contributions to Republican candidates. This is a man who worked for the Republican side of the staff of our committee. This is a man who was appointed by a Republican president. This is a man who met exclusively with the Republican staff and perhaps Republican members, out of which the scope of the audit that concluded only Tea Party-related entities were subject to BOLAs, which was flat out untrue. And when he was questioned under oath in front of our committee by me on that matter, he said, well, we didn't look at the others because it was outside of the scope. He didn't deny there were BOLOs for progressive groups because, in fact, there were. In fact, he'd been advised there were. So if we're going to talk about a political contribution and political activity that's partisan constituting a conflict of interest, then the entire audit prepared by TIGTA and the Inspector General himself are profoundly subject to such a conflict of interest and
thank you.
Subject to query.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly, and I thank all of you. Let's just take it to the people in November. I think it'll all come out in the wash then.
Does the gentleman choose to yield back his time? The gentleman chooses to yield back his time. Is there anyone who seeks? The gentleman from Orlando, Florida, is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that, you know, I'm elected as a representative. I serve in a House of Representatives, which is a group of representatives. Who do we represent? We represent a group of people. And those people have no real recourse except to talk to us. And I guess each one of us get input from folks in our district. I think something's missing here. There are those who, we're talking about the basic rights of citizens, one particular one included here, but there are citizens in my district who 3 years ago wanted to establish an educational forum to teach people about debt, about the Constitution, other things. They organized, and they had an initial meeting, and there were hundreds of people that came. And there was they hired someone to insert their paperwork for a 501c4 before the Internal Revenue Service. And they were asked questions which were bully questions. They were pushed around by people in the IRS. They got letter after letter which they showed me. Now, they didn't show me this until after these things began to happen. They just assumed that everybody was treated this way and that most people could not exercise their right of free speech guaranteed in the First Amendment. They just assumed that. After the person who was just a hired person who made the initial contact with the IRS and submitted all the paperwork and began getting questions that none of us should have had to answer for anything, not to the IRS or anyone else. When they began getting those questions, this man 6 days later was audited by the IRS, and he wanted out. He wasn't even a part of the group. He just wanted out. And then there are these others who were quizzed on, why were you elected chairman? Well, who else was asked to be the chairman of this group? Who are your contributors? Who do they work for? Those are the kind of questions that were asked. That to me is bullying. And so what am I saying? There is a group of people whose rights have been stomped on by the IRS. And if it's, I don't know who it is. If it's Lois Lerner, let's find out. If it's the two rogue employees in Cincinnati, whoever they are, why haven't they been fired? Someone should have paid. And if there's an ongoing investigation, why haven't these people that live in my district been called and asked, hey, what happened to you? I don't understand. And I don't know exactly what's right here, but what I do know is I represent those people. And I want their voice to be heard, and I'm making it heard right now. These people deserve a hearing. They deserve an explanation. And if there are actions, it doesn't matter to me what kind of group applied for what kind of exemption. If they were pushed around like these people were, then they too need a hearing because it's wrong. It's way wrong. And so, like I said, I don't know who it is or what it is, but it seems to me like it's taken an awful long time, and it seems like everything we're doing is ongoing. Well, show some evidence and have some action. And if someone named two rogue employees, well, then somebody knew there were two people, and they probably knew who those two people were. Maybe, I don't know. Then something should have happened to them. I just say, if we're a representative, I am. I've got to represent those people that I just told you about. They're real. They live in my district. They've never been politically involved before. And they were totally run over. And you know what they did? They gave up. They just gave up. Said, okay, we just won't have our group. Because they were told by the IRS, if you collect one dime to further this cause that you want to go forward with, then just know we are coming after you. Until you hear back from us, you can do nothing as a group. So, all of that's documented. They gave me the papers. I have all of that, and we won't go into that. I'm just saying I'm here to represent them, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have to say.
The gentleman will suspend. Does the gentleman yield back his time? Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Texas, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Goodlatte, I really want to thank you for bringing this issue. I know it's been a hard deal, and I know we spent a lot of time at it this evening, but just like Mr. Webster, I hear from my folks at home all the time. They're not shy. They're very free with their opinions that they give to me, and this probably is number 3 on the list of things that I've heard about this past year, the president himself, quoting from a McClatchy News Service from a year ago, said that it was outrageous, if true, that the IRS gave extra scrutiny to right-leaning groups applying for tax-exempt status. Quoting here, they have to be held fully accountable because the IRS is an independent agency and it requires absolute integrity, and people have to have confidence that they are applying the laws in a nonpartisan way, close quote. That's exactly the point of why we're here tonight. That's why it's so important, this resolution that you have brought forward. Nobody likes the IRS, but right now, the opinion that people have out there across the country of the IRS is that they're a suspect agency. And as a consequence, those folks that are required with collecting our taxes now are held in low regard by the populace who's paying those taxes. I would think that the president would personally call you and say, I want this resolution to go forward because we have to get to the bottom of it, and people have to be reassured that this agency is functioning in a nonpartisan, independent, and fair way. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time, and I didn't really have a question, but it was more a statement. I'm glad you've brought this up. I think it's important. I think we do need to see it through. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. I want to thank the witnesses of this panel for not only coming back, several of you spent hours here. I want to thank each of you, and you're now excused. Yes, sir. I now call upon the gentleman, Mr. Cole, or ask him if he would choose to make any presentation on behalf of himself for amendment number 2.
I would, from this position or down
Yeah, the gentleman may make his own decision.
Thank you very much. This actually relates to the previous legislation we were discussing, and Chairman's kind enough to let me offer an amendment. But let me just say I'm going to withdraw the amendment. So this is just to make a point. Oklahomans have a higher percentage of Native Americans in our population than any other state in the Union. The state has 39 federally recognized tribes, no reservations, but literally tens of thousands of acres of Indian land held in trust by the federal government. Each year I work with my colleagues to extend the former Indian land tax credit and Indian employment tax credit. As part of the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1993, these credits were available from 1994 to 2003. However, since they've been annually extended through 2013, it's time to make this economic development tool for Indian country permanent. My amendment would permanently extend both of these tax credits. The provisions will provide tax incentives for businesses that locate or expand on tribal land or former Indian lands, in the case of Oklahoma, and provide a tax credit for businesses that hire Native Americans and their spouses. These provisions are critical to Native American communities nationwide. The former Indian land tax credit provides incentives for businesses to move onto reservations and former reservation land, providing much-needed employment opportunities. Over the years, the federal Indian employment tax credit brought businesses and Native Americans together where they both can benefit. With unemployment rates as high as 80% on some reservations, the federal government must do all it can to ensure we fulfill our responsibilities to the First Americans. I understand, Mr. Chairman, that my amendment is not germane. However, I'd like to work with you to see how we can maintain this credit that's vital to the residents of Indian country, both on reservation land and former Indian reservations like Oklahoma. I simply make this point because we've started down this road of discussing individual extenders. I don't know how far we're going to go. I actually share my opinion, what I think Mr. McGovern's opinion is. We need to look at these things collectively. I want to make sure in this process, while I support the legislation that our friends from Texas brought forward, that we begin that process. So I merely take this opportunity to point out one of these that's particularly important to me, and I'm sure other members of the committee have others that they think are equally important for disadvantaged constituencies. So I want to thank the chairman for his indulgence, and with that I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
He yields back his time, and I would stand with the gentleman with the understanding of the needs of Oklahoma. It's It's an important thing, and I appreciate the gentleman's clarification. The chairman now does not see anyone else that seeks to be recognized for the purpose of an amendment. So I will close once again the hearing portion of H.R. 4438 and H.Res. 565 with the understanding that we recognize we're having two rules. The chairman would now be in receipt of a motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 4438, the American Research and Competitiveness Act of 2014, a closed rule. The rule provides 90 minutes of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Ways and Means, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill, as amended, shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
You have now heard the motion by the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Does anyone seek to?
Yes.
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 4438 by Mr. Cardenas, Mr. Polis, and Mr. Garcia, number 3, which would add comprehensive immigration reform to this tax extender bill. H.R. 15, the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act, would create jobs, encourage research and development, decrease the deficit, and increase revenues by $900 billion.
You've now heard the amendment by the gentleman from Massachusetts in his push for the immigration bill to be added to this. Is there further discussion? All right, the vote will now be on the amendment by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it, noes have it. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none.
Yes,
Excuse me, gentlewoman's now recognized.
Thank you. Oh, okay, I beg your pardon.
Thank you very much.
Next one.
Mr. Chairman. That's fine. As I was saying earlier, there are going to be two.
Yeah, okay.
The vote will be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Excuse me. Does gentleman seek recognition?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's recognized.
On this, I notice, which I won't comment on whether what I think about motions to recommit, but this is a Rules Committee, and I'm not sure exactly how we, who enforces the rules or who enforces, but I would say it probably falls under the purview of this committee. And I've noticed now on the third occasion, a member of the House who is required, in order to offer a motion to recommit, to make a statement that they are opposed to a particular measure that's before the House. And I've seen that now 3 times, where the person has said that, yes, they were opposed to it as it currently is, and 10 minutes later, after failing to pass the motion to recommit, have voted for it. It just bothers me. I just say that, Mr. Chairman, it bothers me, and I'm not sure what to do about it, but at least I'm bringing it up in the Rules Committee.
I appreciate the discussion. Further discussion. The vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The gentleman from Oklahoma will be handling. The gentleman from Oklahoma will be handling this for the Republicans.
And Mr. Hastings for the...
And the gentleman, Judge Hastings, will be handling for the minority. Chairman now be in receipt of the second motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant a rule providing that if House Report 113-415 is called up by direction of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, all points of order against the report shall be waived and it shall be considered as read. The rule provides for consideration of the resolution accompanying House Report 113-415 under a closed rule. The rule provides 50 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform or their respective designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the resolution accompanying the report. The rule provides that the resolution accompanying the report shall be considered as read and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule provides one motion to refer at the conclusion of debate if offered by Representative Cummings of Maryland or his designee, which shall be debatable for 10 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent. The rule provides one motion to recommit the resolution accompanying the report with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of House Resolution 565, calling on Attorney General Eric H. Holder, Jr. to appoint a special counsel to investigate the targeting of conservative nonprofit groups by the Internal Revenue Service under a closed rule. The rule provides 40 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the resolution. Finally, the rule provides that the resolution shall be considered as read and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question.
You now heard the motion by the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Further discussion or amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do have an amendment.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant HRES 565 and the Lois Lerner contempt resolution open rules so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to these bills on the floor. I think if anything cried out for open rules, it's this discussion we've had here this evening to let other members of the House work their will on this piece of legislation.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
I just want to make one comment about our colleague from Orlando, Mr. Webster. He doesn't speak very often in this committee, but when he does, he is always eloquent. And others of us have had examples like his that he described tonight. I've had people in my district, but he does a wonderful job of explaining why he is such a great representative, and I have to say, I really appreciate his comments every time he makes them. Thank you.
Does the gentleman wish to defend himself? Because when the gentlewoman from North Carolina, she makes accusations, and I believe in this case she's right once again, and I thank the gentlewoman. Further discussion. The vote will now be on the Slaughter Amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it, noes have it.
May I have a roll call vote?
Roll call votes requested.
Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Ross-Laitman? Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment's not agreed to. Amendment's not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion by the gentlewoman of North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Roll call, please.
Roll call is requested.
Ms. Fox?
Aye.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Cole? Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Ross-Laitman? Mr. Burgess? Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Slaughter?
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern?
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
The motion is agreed to. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent, will be handling this for the Republicans.
Mr. McGovern for the minority.
And Mr. McGovern for the minority. I would like to thank the committee. I would first like to say this, that occasionally this committee finds itself tested as we have varying degrees of information and people who come up to talk about issues and ideas sometimes that we have a strong opinion for. And I want to thank the committee tonight for their expertise, for their professional demeanor, and for their opportunity to move through the issue. With that said, tomorrow at 2:00 p.m., we will be gathering in the Rules Committee for our hearing on what is known as the Benghazi investigation. 2:00 p.m. tomorrow. This ends our work for the day.